Some mysteries bend the laws of nature so completely that even scientists are left baffled. Among them are eerie stories of planes vanishing into the clouds only to reappear decades later, and ships sailing into the horizon never to return, or returning under impossible circumstances. These tales of alleged time slips, strange distortions, and unexplained journeys through space and time have fascinated investigators and storytellers alike, hinting that reality may not be as fixed as we believe. Join us as we take a look at the real mysteries that show that time might not be as fixed as it seems. The passenger jet that landed 37 years late. On a warm afternoon in July of 1992, air traffic controllers in Caracas, Venezuela, were going about their usual routine when something appeared on their radar screens that immediately confused them. A blip showed a plane approaching from the east, its transponder code reading as if it belonged to a flight long since removed from the records. Controllers radioed the aircraft asking it to identify itself, and after a few moments of silence, a voice came through, clear but shaken, introducing itself as Panama. Flight 914 en route from New York to Miami. The problem was that this particular flight had vanished without a trace 37 years earlier in 1955 and was presumed to have been lost forever. The staff inside the tower exchanged glances, each one struggling to understand what they were hearing. Records confirmed that Panama Flight 914 had indeed been scheduled to arrive in Miami on July 2, 1955, carrying 57 passengers and 4 crew members. According to official reports, it had departed from New York without incident before disappearing from radar. Extensive searches had been carried out at the time, covering wide stretches of the Atlantic Ocean, but no wreckage was ever found. Families were left without answers, convinced that their loved ones had perished. Yet here, almost 4 decades later, the plane appeared alive and airborne, its pilot speaking calmly as though only a few hours had passed since takeoff. As the controllers guided the jet down for an emergency landing, fire and rescue crews rushed to position themselves along the tarmac. When the aircraft finally touched down, witnesses described its design as unmistakably outdated. The fuselage bore the Pan American logo in paint that looked fresh but was styled decades out of time, and its engines roared with the sound of a craft built in the early years of passenger aviation. The landing itself was smooth, but what followed left many shaken. The pilot radioed once more, asking where exactly they had landed, and when told they were in Caracas in 1992, he responded with disbelief, insisting that their departure had been just a few hours earlier from Idlewild Airport in New York. Airport officials quickly surrounded the aircraft, approaching with caution. The crew and passengers could be seen through the windows, staring outside with expressions that range from nervousness to outright terror. When the doors opened, witnesses claimed the interior looked like a time capsule. Passengers wore clothing styles from the 1950s, men in suits and hats, women in dresses that matched old photographs from the era. Inside the cockpit, the instruments were analog dials and gauges untouched by modern digital upgrades. Everything about the jet seemed to confirm that it truly was the missing Panama flight. Yet the most chilling detail came from the passengers themselves. Interviews later described them as confused, some crying, others demanding to know why the airport looked so strange and modern. They all insisted they had been in the air for only a few hours, unaware that decades had passed. For them, time had not moved at all. No one had aged a single day since 1955. The youngest among them remained a child, still clutching a toy from that era, while older passengers looked exactly as they had been described in missing persons reports. News of the strange arrival spread quickly, but according to many retellings, authorities moved in to contain the situation. Witnesses said the passengers and crew were escorted away by government officials, and the aircraft itself was rolled into a secure hangar. From that point, the trail of evidence begins to blur. Some claimed the jet vanished once more under mysterious circumstances, taken away and hidden. Others insisted that official reports were altered, witnesses silenced, and the story dismissed as rumor. Despite this, enough details circulated to keep the legend alive, with those who swore they had seen the landing standing by their own accounts. Skeptics later suggested the entire story was fabricated, pointing out the lack of physical records to confirm the jet's reappearance. They argued that no credible airline documentation or photograph survived to prove the event had truly taken place. Still, believers countered that governments would have every reason to cover up such an incident, fearing public panic over what it might reveal about time and reality itself. For them, the disappearance and return of Flight 914 remained one of the strongest pieces of evidence that time travel or dimensional slips are not just fantasy, but a hidden part of our world. Even today, the case is debated in books, television specials, and forums dedicated to the unexplained. The mystery endures because it raises so many unsettling questions. If Panama Flight 914 truly entered some kind of temporal rift in 1955, where had it been during those 37 years? Were the passengers suspended in a place outside of time, untouched by the decades rushing forward in the world they left behind? Or had they simply moved along a path invisible to us only to emerge suddenly out of step with history? The lack of aging and the absence of memory loss suggests something more profound than a simple disappearance. What makes the tale especially haunting is the human element. Families of the missing were never given closure, and if the story is true, their loved ones reappeared unchanged, while entire generations had lived and died without them. Imagine stepping off a plane, expecting to walk into the bustling city of Miami in 1955, only to find yourself in a world of unfamiliar technology, altered skylines, and strangers telling you that everyone you knew was long gone. It is this emotional weight that keeps the legend alive, even as skeptics dismiss it. Whether a hoax, a misunderstanding, or a genuine brush with time's hidden dimensions, the story of the passenger jet that landed 37 years late continues to captivate. It is retold again and again, not because it is easily proven, but because it speaks to a deep fear and fascination within us. If time is not as fixed as we believe, then every journey carries the chance of vanishing into the unknown and returning to a world that has moved on without us. The mystery of time-traveling Father Pelgro Ernetti. In the middle of the 20th century, a Venetian priest named Pelgro Ernetti quietly stirred one of the most unusual controversies the Catholic Church has ever brushed against. He was not only a clergyman, but also a respected scholar of music and an exorcist, known for his sharp intellect and his steady discipline. Yet beneath his academic life, Ernetti claimed that he'd worked with a group of scientists to create a machine capable of looking directly into the past. He called it the chronovis, and for him, it was not an idea drawn from imagination, but a functioning device that could reveal scenes from history as if they were happening in front of the viewer. Accounts of his story described the chronovisor as a large box filled with mysterious controls and an antenna-like structure that captured signals from the echoes of time itself. Ernetti explained that every sound and action leaves behind a trace, a kind of imprint on the fabric of the universe, and his machine could tune into these traces like a radio finding a broadcast. To most listeners, it sounded like fantasy, but Ernetti spoke with the confidence of someone who believed completely in what he'd seen. According to him, the team included 12 experts, among them physicists and engineers who worked in secret during the 1950s and 1960s. The priest's claims grew bolder over the years. He stated that he had personally witnessed episodes from ancient Rome, including a dramatic performance of the play Thyestes by Quintus Ennius, a work considered lost to time. Ernetti even attempted to reproduce parts of the script from memory, offering them as proof that the chronovisor had captured it. But the most unsettling claim came when he revealed that the machine had shown him the crucifixion of Christ. He described watching the event unfold in vivid detail, from the anguish of the crowd to the expressions of those around the cross. For Anetti, this was not a vision or a matter of faith, but a direct observation of history through technology. In 1972, an Italian magazine published an alleged photograph taken with the chronizer, said to be an image of Jesus at the moment of his death. The picture sparked intense debate. Some considered it evidence of the impossible, while skeptics pointed out that the photo closely resembled a known statue in a church. Anetti never publicly denied or confirmed that the image had been manipulated, but he continued to insist that the device existed. He explained that the church eventually ordered the chronosaur dismantled, fearing the danger it posed. If people could peer into the past at will, secrets both sacred and private could be revealed, and the flow of history itself might be misused. Doubt came quickly, with many calling Anetti's claims a work of imagination rather than fact. They argued that no scientific foundation supported the idea of lingering echoes of the past being accessible, and no evidence of the chronizer had ever been produced beyond Anetti's words. Still, his position as a respected priest and scholar made the story difficult to dismiss outright. Unlike the wild claims of fringe mystics, Anetti had lived a life of discipline and study, and his reputation had been solid before he spoke of the device. To his supporters, this lent weight to the possibility that he had indeed stumbled upon something extraordinary. When questioned about the chronovis later in his life, Anetti never wavered. He acknowledged that the machine had been taken apart and hidden, saying it was safer that way. He suggested that the technology was too powerful for public hands, capable not only of looking into the past, but also of observing the future. That implication unsettled even his sympathizers, for it raised the question of who should decide what moments could be watched and which should remain untouched. One of the most intriguing aspects of Anetti's story was his insistence on collaboration. He never presented himself as the sole inventor, but always spoke of the group of 12 experts, which he claimed included figures from both science and religion. None of these collaborators ever stepped forward, however, and their absence fueled suspicion. Some suggested that Anetti may have embellished his experiences or even fallen victim to his own imagination, but others wondered if those involved had been silenced by authority. In the years following his death in 1994, the legend of Father Anetti's chronizer only grew. Researchers, paranormal investigators, and conspiracy theorists picked apart his claims, searching for consistency or deception. The fragment of the ancient play he reproduced was criticized by scholars as inaccurate. Yet believers insisted that this did not erase the possibility of truth. The supposed photograph of Christ was traced to a sculpture. Yet others argued that even if that image was fabricated, it did not prove the machine had never existed. The mystery endured precisely because there was never enough evidence to confirm or destroy the account. Anetti's story holds power because it is not merely about an invention, but about the doubts and possibilities it stirs. If it were possible to see the past exactly as it happened, human history would be laid bare. Myths could be confirmed or overturned. Crimes could be solved with certainty, and sacred events could be viewed beyond faith or doubt. At the same time, privacy and free will would vanish, for nothing would remain hidden from those who could peer through time. The consequences would be enormous, reshaping law, religion, and society itself. Even now, the chronovisor is spoken of as one of the strangest intersections of faith and science. Some consider it nothing more than a priest's elaborate invention, while others see it as a suppressed truth hidden away to keep humanity from a power it was not ready to wield. Father Pelgro Anetti's reputation in music and theology is secure, but his legacy is forever haunted by the shadow of a machine he swore existed, one that could turn the distant past into a present moment. Whether myth, hoax, or a glimpse of knowledge withheld, the story remains one of the most enduring time travel mysteries of the last century. Flight 517 and the ghostly arrival. When an aircraft touches down on a runway, it is normally the end of an ordinary journey. But in the story of Santiago Flight 5 or 13, the landing was said to defy everything people knew about aviation, time, and even life itself. The tale begins in 1954 when the flight operated by a Brazilian airline allegedly took off from Aachen, West Germany, with more than 90 passengers and crew on board bound for Porto Alegre, Brazil. The weather was clear, the aircraft was in good condition, and nothing suggested that this would be anything more than a routine transatlantic journey. Yet after takeoff, radio contact was lost, and despite repeated attempts, no signals came back. Days passed with no word, and search efforts yielded nothing. The aircraft and everyone on it were declared lost. Another tragedy of the skies with grieving families left behind. The strange part of the story comes decades later when, according to the accounts that circulate air traffic controllers in Porto Alegre, were stunned on the afternoon of October 12, 1989 to see a vintage Lockheed Super Constellation approaching the airport. The controllers were baffled because the model had long been retired and none had been in commercial use for years. As the craft circled the runway, confusion turned to alarm as it gave no radio response and yet maneuvered with precision. Finally, it lowered its landing gear and touched down smoothly, coming to rest as if completing a journey it had started just hours earlier. Ground crews rushed to meet it, uncertain whether this was a restored aircraft flown by enthusiasts or something more unusual. The shock only grew once the doors were finally opened by authorities. Inside, rows of passengers sat motionless in their seats, and the cockpit held the captain and his crew equally still. The bodies, according to reports, were not in a state of recent death, but appeared skeletal, as though decades had passed since their last breath. Luggage compartments contained clothing and belongings from the mid-1950s untouched by time. What unsettled officials most was the paperwork allegedly found in the cockpit. Flight logs and navigation notes dated September 1954, showing the aircraft had departed Germany on the same day it was recorded lost. The arrival, by contrast, had taken place 35 years later, with no explanation for how the plane had remained intact or why it appeared to have completed its route, as if no gap had occurred. Reports claim that Brazilian aviation authorities briefly impounded the aircraft and restricted access to the site, fueling rumors of a cover-up. Technicians who allegedly examined the plane were said to have been baffled by its condition, with engines and fuel tanks intact despite having no logical means of preservation over 35 years. Some versions of the account even mentioned that the landing gear tires showed no signs of wear, as though they had only recently been manufactured, deepening the sense that the craft had somehow bypassed normal decay. Speculation quickly took hold, and theories spread among those who heard the account. Some suggested that Flight 513 had entered some kind of temporal anomaly, a rift in space and time that swallowed the aircraft and returned it decades later out of phase with ordinary reality. Others leaned toward a more terrestrial explanation, suspecting that the story was an elaborate fabrication designed to stir fear or mystery. Yet the detail often repeated, the eerie image of a ghostly plane gliding to a perfect landing with no living soul aboard, was difficult for people to dismiss. The Brazilian press reportedly carried stories on the incident, though no official government statement has ever confirmed it, and many historians believe the tale is rooted more in legend than fact. The connection to time travel fascinated believers. If the reports were taken at face value, the passengers and crew may have experienced no lapse at all, vanishing in 1954 and arriving in 1989 only to discover too late what had happened. Some writers on the paranormal compared the case to other aviation mysteries, such as the lost Flight 19 squadron in the Bermuda Triangle, or the stories of aircraft that seem to vanish and reappear with gaps in their timelines. The lock state of the plane, the intact nature of the fuselage, and the dramatic contrast between its mid-century interior and the late 1980s world it had suddenly entered added to the chilling quality of the story. As the story circulated, it began appearing not only in Brazilian newspapers, but also in European and American paranormal magazines, each adding slight variations. In some retellings, officials quietly dismantled and removed the aircraft to an undisclosed location, while others insisted it was left to decay in a restricted hangar before disappearing from records entirely. Aviation historians who encountered the tale noted that no official registry listed the disposal of such a plane, which for believers was proof that something unusual had indeed been hidden from public view. Those who doubt the tale point to the absence of hard evidence: no official photographs, no physical remnants of the aircraft, and no airport records to back the claim. They argue that the story most likely originated from a tabloid article that spread across paranormal publications, gaining traction as it was retold and embellished. For them, the absence of official documents or physical artifacts is enough to dismiss the entire event as folklore. Yet even skeptics admit the story's persistence is striking because it continues to appear in books, television specials, and online discussions decades after it was first circulated. The reason the Flight 5 Bustine legend endures is not only the haunting image of a silent plane arriving with a skeletal crew, but the way it touches on deep human fears and unanswered curiosities. Air travel is supposed to be governed by strict schedules, navigation systems, and predictable paths. And when an aircraft vanishes, it leaves behind an unsettling gap in logic. Stories like this fill that void with supernatural or otherworldly explanations, transforming a simple disappearance into something that challenges the boundaries of science, whether viewed as an elaborate hoax, a metaphor for lost time, or a genuine mystery. The legend of Flight 513 continues to circulate precisely because it cannot be easily resolved. Even though the evidence remains elusive, the image endures. A gleaming super-constellation outdated by decades, touching down on a Brazilian runway as though it had never missed its scheduled arrival. Its passengers locked in eternal stillness. It is this mixture of the ordinary and the impossible that keeps people returning to the story, wondering whether the flight was caught in some hidden corridor of time or whether it was simply the creation of imagination feeding on collective unease. Either way, the legend of Flight 513 remains one of aviation's most haunting tales, suspended between history and myth, leaving behind a question that refuses to land as smoothly as the plane itself. The time slip of Sir Victor Goddard, music. The story of Sir Victor Goddard begins in the mid-1930s when aviation was still in its bold experimental years and the skies were filled with both progress and uncertainty. Goddard was not an ordinary pilot. He was a decorated officer in the Royal Air Force, a man trusted for his discipline, sharp mind, and commitment to the service. His career had already taken him through this First World War, and by 1935 he was a respected commander with a reputation for clear judgment. That background makes what happened to him in Scotland even more striking, because he was the kind of man least likely to invent wild tales or be fooled by illusions. In 1935, Goddard took off from Edinburgh in a Hawker biplane, flying toward his base. His route carried him near an old airfield at Drem, a place the RAF had abandoned years before. Pilots in the area knew it as a run-down patch of land with broken hangars, weeds pushing through cracked pavement, and no sign of activity. Goddard himself had seen it in that ruined condition more than once, so when he passed near it that day, he expected only the familiar sight of decay. What came next defied those expectations and has puzzled researchers ever since. As he neared the airfield, Goddard suddenly flew into a violent storm that seemed to erupt from nowhere. Dark clouds swallowed his aircraft. Rain hammered the fuselage and the biplane shook under the force of strong winds. The storm felt unnatural, as though it had risen up solely in his path, and the turbulence threatened to tear his plane apart. Struggling for control, he dipped lower in hopes of stabilizing. And it was in that moment that the storm abruptly vanished. The clouds parted, the rain stopped, and his eyes fell on the airfield below. But instead of the abandoned ruins he expected, he saw a base alive with activity. Below him, the air rip looked newly paved, smooth and clean, as though freshly laid. Hangars stood repaired, painted, and in use, while the field itself bustled with movement. He saw mechanics in blue coveralls, a uniform the RAF did not use in 1935, working on aircraft lined up neatly along the tarmac. Most startling of all, the planes themselves were not the familiar biplanes of the era, but sleek modern monoplane designs painted in bright yellow aircraft the Royal Air Force had not yet adopted. The entire vision seemed to belong to another time, one that had not yet arrived, and God had circled in disbelief, trying to understand how a forgotten ruin could transform into a busy, updated station before his eyes. His training and experience told him to distrust anything that seemed impossible, but everything he observed appeared solid and real. The colors were sharp, the movements of the mechanics natural, and the details of the planes unmistakable. He flew low enough to confirm the layout of the airfield and the uniforms of the crew, convinced he was not dreaming or imagining. Yet, as suddenly as it had appeared, the scene dissolved when he pulled away. The storm returned, battering his aircraft once more, until at last he broke free and managed to navigate safely back to base. Though shaken, he reported the strange experience to colleagues, only to meet skepticism and silence. For such a story did not fit with the expectations of military men. Years passed and the incident might have faded into obscurity, if not for what came later. By 1939, just as Europe was plunging into the Second World War, the RAF did indeed reopen the Drem airfield. It was refurbished, repaved, and once again filled with aircraft and personnel. Mechanics now wore blue coveralls precisely as Goddard had seen, and the service introduced the yellow-painted training planes, monoplane models that matched the description he had given years earlier. Every detail he had witnessed in 1935 lined up with the changes that only appeared 4 years later, leading some to argue that he'd glimpsed the future, a slip forward in time that could not be explained by ordinary means. Other explanations have been put forward by skeptics. Some suggest Goddard may have imagined the details under stress, the storm creating illusions as his mind tried to cope with turbulence and danger. Others argue he could have misinterpreted what he saw, mistaking training activities at another field for DRM, though his familiarity with the location makes that unlikely. Still, others lean towards psychological theories, pointing out that long flights under stress can alter perception. Yet, none of these theories explain how he correctly described changes to the airfield and the introduction of new planes and uniforms that he could not possibly have known about in 1935. For Goddard, the event remained one of the strangest episodes of his career. He continued to serve with distinction, later rising to the rank of Air Marshal, and remained known as a man of clear judgment. Unlike those who might embellish or seek attention, he never dramatized the story, but he also never retracted it. In lectures and writings, he referred to the incident without exaggeration, describing it as a mystery he could not solve. His credibility and stature made it difficult for critics to dismiss him as a fanciful storyteller, and his account has continued to intrigue historians and researchers who examine the strange overlap of aviation, history, and unexplained phenomena. The case of Sir Victor Goddard raises questions that stretch beyond a single flight. If his account was accurate, then time might not be as fixed as we believe, and certain moments of stress or environmental disturbance could open glimpses into another era. Some researchers tie his experience to the concept of time slips, moments when boundaries blur and individuals step briefly into the past or the future. Others wonder if the violent storm acted as a kind of trigger, disrupting normal perception and pushing him into a reality not yet realized. Whatever the mechanism, the story remains unique because it is tied to a respected military figure who had little to gain and everything to lose by telling it. Decades after the event, people still debate what Sir Victor Goddard truly saw in the skies over Scotland, the abandoned airfield that suddenly appeared full of life, the modern planes that had not yet been built, and the uniforms unknown at the time all combined into a story that resists easy answers. Whether it was a glimpse of the future, a psychological phenomenon, or something far stranger, his account has become one of the most enduring examples of time slips in modern history. And as long as the mystery remains unsolved, the flight over Dremme will continue to unsettle those who read about it, a reminder that even the most disciplined minds can sometimes stumble into the unexplainable. The Madrid airport time traveler. Travelers passing through airports are used to seeing long lines, confusing gates, and the occasional delay. But the man who appeared in Madrid in the early 1990s was unlike anything staff at Barajas International Airport had ever encountered. He looked like an ordinary businessman at first glance, dressed in a suit and carrying a briefcase. But the documents he carried and the way he spoke quickly pulled him out of the category of just another passenger. Instead of producing a passport that matched any known country, he handed over papers stamped with the emblem of a nation no one had ever heard of. Authorities assumed at first that this was some sort of mix-up, a fake passport or a forged document. But the officials examining the case were experienced and not easily fooled. The passport was genuine in every physical sense, printed with the security features that matched international standards of the time, and the traveler seemed calm and confident as he explained that he'd flown in from his home country on business. What puzzled the inspectors most was not only the fact that the nation of Taurid did not exist on any map, but also that the man expressed disbelief when shown a map of Europe. He insisted that Taurid was located between France and Spain, occupying a space that corresponded with the tiny principality of Andor. When investigators pressed him, he provided further details that made the case stranger. Still, he carried a driver's license and business papers that all matched his supposed nationality. His spoken languages included French, Japanese, and an unfamiliar tongue that no one at the airport recognized immediately. To deepen the mystery, he said he had been traveling regularly to Europe for more than 5 years and had never before been questioned. Airline tickets in his pocket confirmed his story, complete with official stamps and a scheduled return flight. The incident soon drew in higher-level authorities, and the traveler was moved to a separate room for questioning. His attitude shifted between confusion and frustration as he demanded to know why he was being treated as a criminal. He repeatedly pointed to his documents as proof, while the staff could do nothing but shake their heads. They asked him to show them where his country was on the map, and when he pointed to the location of Andor, his face reportedly went pale. He swore that something was wrong with the maps, that they had been altered, or that he had somehow been brought into the wrong version of the world. With no immediate explanation available, officials decided to place him under temporary accommodation at a nearby hotel, guarded to ensure he would not simply vanish. The plan was to continue investigations the following morning, verifying his papers and seeking any connection to international forgers or intelligence operations. The man accepted this reluctantly. Still maintaining that he was the victim of some bizarre mistake, guards accompanied him to his room and everything appeared to be under control. What happened next sealed this case as one of the strangest airport stories ever recorded. When officials returned to his hotel room the next day, the man was gone. The door remained locked from the inside and the windows were several stories up with no balcony and no sign of tampering. His belongings, including the documents that had sparked the entire investigation, had also disappeared. Not a single trace of the traveler from Taurid was left behind, leaving authorities to scramble for explanations that range from deliberate escape to something far more unearthly. Airport officials, desperate to find answers, launched a discreet but intense search in the days that followed. They interviewed hotel staff, reviewed security logs, and even checked airports and train stations in case he had managed to slip away unnoticed. Nothing turned up. What unsettled investigators most was that the hotel's guard on duty swore he never left his post and saw no one exit the room during the night. Local police were eventually called in, but they too could find no rational explanation for how a man under watch could vanish without leaving behind so much as a fingerprint or a piece of clothing. The lack of publicly released government files has led skeptics to claim the story is nothing more than fabrication, or at best, an overblown rumor. Yet, versions of the account have circulated among airport staff and in various publications, keeping the legend alive. Some suggest that he may have been a skilled forger who exploited the chaos of the time, while others believe the lack of physical evidence points to a deliberate cover-up. Still, for those who favor the paranormal interpretation, the case is seen as a rare example of a time slip where an individual may have crossed over from one-dimensional parallel world into another. Psychologists who have examined the account note that the man's behavior does not fit the profile of a con artist, showed no signs of deceitful body language, and appeared genuinely distressed when confronted, with evidence that contradicted his understanding of geography. His insistence that Torrid was real, coupled with his disappearance from a locked hotel room, continues to fuel speculation that something extraordinary took place. Some theories go even further, proposing that the incident may be tied to rare disruptions in the fabric of space and time that occasionally place people in locations they do not belong. While no definitive explanation has ever surfaced, the tale of the tour traveler remains a cautionary reminder of how fragile our sense of reality can be. Airports are places designed for order and control, where borders are checked and identities are verified. Yet in this case, those very systems broke down when confronted with something beyond their comprehension. The officials involved were left with more questions than answers. And for decades since, the mystery has lingered in whispers and retellings, whether it was an elaborate deception, a case of mistaken identity elevated into legend, or a genuine glimpse into a parallel world. The man from Torrid left behind a story that defies easy explanation and continues to unsettle those who hear it. The hotel that vanished in France. The unsettling tale, as told by the travelers themselves, began not with mystery, but with a simple effort to find shelter on a long journey through the countryside. Two English couples were making their way across the region in 1979, enjoying a holiday and hoping to take in the scenery while avoiding the heavy crowds in larger towns. As daylight faded and the road stretched on, they realized they would need a place to stay for the night. Not wanting to push further into unfamiliar territory after dark, they decided to stop at the next accommodation they found. Ahead of them stood something that seemed far too perfectly placed. A roadside inn with shutters on its windows and a quiet old-fashioned design came into view, offering exactly the kind of rest they were seeking. The couple noticed immediately that it looked unlike the modern hotels they had stayed in before. Instead, it gave the impression of being from another era, entirely with heavy wooden furniture, stone floors, and doors that locked with iron keys rather than plastic cards. Even the staff seemed strangely out of step with the time. The innkeeper wore clothes that might have belonged to the early 1900s, and the women working there wore long dresses and aprons that no one in the late 20th century would normally wear. At dinner, the guests were offered a meal that felt equally unusual. Instead of the expected variety of modern dishes, they were served simple food, bread, cheese, meat, and wine in a manner that reminded them of rustic farmhouse traditions. When the couple asked for something more familiar, they were told this was what the Ainut had available. And though surprised, they accepted it. What struck them most, however, was not just the meal, but the strange atmosphere that surrounded the entire place. There were no telephones in sight, no electrical lighting apart from dim lamps, and the building seemed untouched by the passing decades of technology. When they went to bed, they noticed details that left them uneasy. The mattresses were thin, the bedding coarse, and the windows barred by heavy wooden shutters. Yet, they convinced themselves it was simply an old inn that had chosen to keep its historic charm rather than modernize. They rested through the night, and the following morning, after paying what seemed to be an unusually low rate for their stay, they continued on their way. Several nights later, as their trip continued, the couple attempted to book another night at the same inn. They were charmed by its quiet, its authenticity, and its low price, and thought it would be a good base to return to. But when they reached the stretch of road where it should have been, there was nothing there. They drove back and forth, checking for side roads, hidden paths, or any indication of the inn's existence. Yet every attempt ended the same. The inn had vanished completely, leaving only an empty road lined with fields. Puzzled, the travelers asked locals about the inn, describing its location and appearance in detail. Each time, they were met with confused looks and firm denials. No one in the town or surrounding villages knew of such a place, and some even insisted that no inn had stood there for decades. One man told them that a building fitting their description had burned down early in the 20th century and had never been rebuilt, which only deepened the strangeness of their memories. In the years after, the story was shared in interviews and retellings, and the couples held firmly to their account. They insisted that they had stayed in a real building, eaten real food, and slept in real beds. Yet every piece of evidence suggested they had experienced something else entirely. Researchers who looked into the case noted that the clothes described, the food served, and the furnishings all seemed consistent with a much earlier time, perhaps the late 1800s or early 1900s. The most haunting detail came when one of the couples developed a roll of film they had taken on their trip. Photographs from Paris, Lyon, and other stops appeared clearly. Yet the shots they had taken at the inn were missing. Where the inn should have been captured on film, there was nothing but blank exposures, as if the camera had failed only in that place. Over time, the account became a classic case in discussions of time slips, those baffling experiences where ordinary people seem to step outside their own era and into another. Some have suggested the couple stumbled into a fold of time, catching a glimpse of a world that no longer exists before being returned to their own. Others believe it was a shared hallucination, a trick of fatigue, or even a prank of memory that grew into something larger with each retelling. Yet, what makes the case so enduring is the clarity with which the couples remembered the details. They did not describe vague feelings or blurred impressions. Instead, they spoke of furniture, clothing, food, and architecture in specific terms. Their conviction that they had experienced something real never wavered, even when skeptics dismissed the story. To this day, the vanished inn remains an unsolved riddle. Was it a relic of the past, still lingering in some hidden corner of the countryside, unseen by others, and eventually lost? Was it a doorway into another time, briefly opened and then closed without explanation? Or was it nothing more than the mind's strange capacity to weave memory and imagination together into something that feels as real as stone and wood? The couples themselves never found the answer, and perhaps that is what gives the story its power. They set out on a holiday in France, expecting nothing more than simple travel and relaxation. But what they brought back was a memory that has unsettled and fascinated people for decades. Somewhere along a quiet road, they stepped into a night that belonged not to their time, but to another. And when they tried to return, the place they had visited was gone forever. The time slip of Charlotte Anne Moy and Elena. Visitors to Paris in the early years of the 20th century often remarked on the way the city seemed to carry echoes of its past. And for Charlotte Anne Mobley and Elena Jordan, two educated English women, that sense of history became far more than a poetic impression during an afternoon walk through the gardens of Versailles in 1901. Both women, accomplished in their fields and working together at St. Hugh's College, Oxford, had chosen to visit the famous palace while in France, expecting only to enjoy the grounds and the remnants of royal grandeur. Yet what they later claimed to have experienced would not only alter the course of their lives, but also ignite one of the most curious debates in the literature of the supernatural. Their journey began in a rather ordinary fashion with a visit to the Petit Triangle, a small estate once beloved by Marie Antoinette. The day was clear but unremarkable, and neither of the women had any reason to expect what was about to unfold. As they followed a path toward the gardens, Moy recalled an unsettling change in the atmosphere, as though the air had grown heavy and the sunlight dimmed in a way that gave the landscape an oddly flat appearance. Gerin, though less expressive at the time, later admitted she too felt as if they had stepped into a scene drained of its usual vitality, as though the world itself had shifted into a different register. The sense of dislocation deepened when they encountered several figures dressed in clothing that struck them as entirely out of place. One man wore a long old-fashioned cloak and carried himself with a formality that seemed at odds with the casual visitors one might expect at a popular tourist site. Another figure, they thought, bore the look of a gardener, but his dress belonged to a much earlier era. Neither woman recalled seeing anyone else who seemed to notice the strangeness of these individuals, and the silence of the garden weighed on them in a way that made the scene feel almost theatrical, as though they had stumbled onto a stage where a historical play was in progress. At one point, Jourdain described seeing a small building she could not later find on any map of the grounds. Its windows, she insisted, had been shuttered in a style that was outmoded even by 19th century standards, and the structure gave her a feeling of profound unease. Mobley, walking slightly ahead, reported her attention being drawn to a woman sketching nearby, dressed in a pale gown with a wide-brimmed hat. The impression she received was so vivid that she later became convinced she'd been looking upon Marie onto a net herself, caught in some inexplicable vision of the past. When the two women eventually reached the Petit Triangle, the spell seemed to lift and the atmosphere of normality returned as they mingled with other visitors. Yet both carried with them the weight of what they had seen, each uncertain whether to trust her own perception. It was only after they compared notes in the following days that the true depth of their shared experience became clear. To their astonishment, the details they recounted matched with remarkable precision, from the peculiar clothing of the figures to the oppressive change in the air. Rather than dismiss the event as a trick of memory or imagination, they decided to investigate. Historical records revealed that during the final years before the French Revolution, the Petit Triangle had been a place of retreat for the Queen, where she would often walk the gardens or sit sketching. Some of the costumes they described also aligned with fashion from the 1780s, details that seemed far beyond what either woman could have fabricated without research. More puzzling still was the structure swore she had seen, which scholars confirmed had once existed, but had long since vanished before their visit. Convinced that something extraordinary had occurred, the women eventually compiled their findings and impressions into a book, An Adventure. Published anonymously in 1911, the text described their Versailles experience in full and laid out the evidence they believed supported their claim of a genuine time slip. The book quickly drew attention not only from those fascinated by tales of the paranormal, but also from skeptics who accused them of romanticizing or misinterpreting what had been nothing more than a psychological episode. Critics suggested the fatigue, the power of suggestion, or even a shared hallucination might explain the account. Others dismissed it as a product of two imaginative academics caught up in the atmosphere of a historic site. Yet the consistency of their testimonies, written independently before being compared, gave pause even to some detractors. Mobley and Jourdain remained steadfast in their belief, never retracting their story despite the waves of doubt and ridicule it attracted. As the story spread, the Versailles experience became a landmark case in the law of time displacement. It was cited in studies of paranormal phenomena, debated in academic circles, and revisited by enthusiasts who sought to retrace the women's steps to test whether anything unusual might still be detected. Decades later, researchers using maps and historical accounts confirmed details that match their descriptions, such as the location of long demolished outbuildings and the clothing styles of figures tied to the court of Louis XVI. For Moy and Juden, the experience remained a profound and inexplicable moment that could not be easily categorized as either fantasy or fact. They continued their academic careers, but the shadow of SI followed them, and their story was retold in countless variations as evidence of a world that does not always conform to the rules of time and reason. Even today, their testimony is examined as part of the wider mystery of how human perception might sometimes slip outside ordinary boundaries, offering fleeting glimpses of another age. Their account of walking through the gardens has lasted not for the clarity it offers, but for the way it unsettles our sense of what can and cannot be real. If two well-educated women in the early 20th century could describe in such careful detail an encounter with the past that aligns with lost pieces of history, then the line between imagination and reality becomes far more fragile than most would like to admit. And so the account of Charlotte Ann Moy and Elena Geran continues to linger a century later as one of the most unsettling and enduring tales of a time slip ever recorded. The Bold Street time slips of Liverpool. Crowds in Liverpool often move quickly along Bold Street, with shoppers, commuters, and workers weaving through the busy heart of the city. But over the years, certain people have come forward with accounts that suggest time itself does not always flow normally there. One of the most well-known cases involved an off-duty police officer named Frank, who in 1996 claimed he was suddenly surrounded by sights and sounds that belonged to a different age. He had been walking toward a record shop where he planned to meet his wife. But as he crossed the street, the modern traffic and storefront seemed to dissolve, leaving him standing in an older version of Liverpool that matched the city decades earlier. Frank later described how the road was lined with cars from the 1950s, their rounded shapes and polished chrome glinting in the sun, while the shop he had been approaching no longer displayed modern albums, but bore the name Cripps, a clothing store that had shut down many years before. Men in hats and women in long coats walked briskly past him, carrying bags with designs that matched the styles of mid-century Liverpool. For several minutes, he felt fully immersed in this altered scene until he crossed the street again and found himself back in the familiar present-day surroundings. The record shop once again in front of him as if nothing had happened. What made his story especially unsettling was that Cripps had in fact operated in that location during the period he described, though it had vanished long before 1996 when he later compared his memory with city records. The details aligned so closely that it seemed unlikely he'd simply imagined the name or setting. His account was not isolated either. In fact, reports began to cluster so noticeably in the late 1990s that local newspapers occasionally ran short features on Liverpool Street, where time stands still, sparking public debate about whether the phenomenon should be taken seriously. Other locals and visitors have reported similar experiences on the same stretch of Bold Street, often describing a sudden hush in the atmosphere, a change in lighting, and a peculiar sense of being displaced. One case that received attention involved a woman in the early 2000s who stepped into what she believed was a new shop to browse. She later told friends she remembered wooden shelves, staff dressed in clothing from the mid-10th century, and an overall sense of stepping into something charmingly old-fashioned. When she returned only a few days later to show the place to a friend, the building no longer housed that shop, but instead displayed a modern storefront with staff insisting no such business had been there in decades. Some researchers of paranormal phenomena have suggested that Bold Street may be what is sometimes called a thin place, a location where different periods somehow overlap. The theory is that layers of history, rather than fading away, remain imprinted on the landscape, and under certain circumstances, people can step into them briefly. Skeptics, on the other hand, point out that busy streets can produce confusion and that stress, exhaustion, or even the way memory works might create convincing but false impressions. Yet, the consistency of the Bold Street stories makes them difficult to dismiss outright. Witnesses frequently describe a change in air pressure, as if the street suddenly quiets and the atmosphere thickens just before the slip occurs. A student once recalled dropping his books in surprise as the bustling modern traffic was replaced by horse-drawn carts, their wheels clattering against cobblestones, while passers-by stared at him as though he were out of place. He insisted that the brief moment felt entirely real, and that he could even smell the smoke from coal fires drifting in the air. Accounts like his suggest these are not simple tricks of the imagination, but deeply vivid experiences. One man even claimed that when he tried to speak during his slip, his voice sounded muffled to his own ears, as though he were shouting underwater, which left him shaken long after he returned to the present. Local historians have become intrigued by the fact that so many of the shops and street scenes described in these experiences can be verified through old records and photographs. Those who claim to have stepped into the past often recall names of businesses, fashion styles, and even the arrangement of window displays that match what the city once looked like long before they were born. This has led some to wonder whether the slips provide genuine glimpses into history, even if only for fleeting moments. The frequency of these stories has given Bold Street a reputation beyond Liverpool, attracting paranormal investigators who walk the street hoping for their own encounter. Some even try to recreate conditions reported by witnesses, such as approaching the area while distracted or visiting at specific times of day when light and atmosphere might play tricks on perception. While no controlled experiment has ever caught a time slip in action, the body of personal testimonies continues to grow, and each story adds to the mystery that has made the street legendary. For residents, the stories spark a mix of curiosity and unease. On one hand, the idea that their city hides moments where time folds in on itself lends a sense of wonder and connection to history. On the other hand, it unsettles those who walk the same streets daily, never knowing whether they might suddenly step into another era. Unlike ghost sightings or folklore, these accounts are filled with ordinary details, shopping bags, price tags, traffic sounds that give them a sense of authenticity. Taxi drivers have also shared stories of picking up passengers who appeared dressed from another era only to vanish mid-ride or leave behind no trace on security cameras, adding a chilling layer to the Bold Street mystery. What stands out most is that those who experience Bold Street slips rarely report fear in the moment. Instead, they feel confusion, fascination, or a strong sense of dislocation, only realizing the strangeness after the fact. Frank, the policeman, later admitted that his training and observation made the event even more troubling because he was sure of what he saw and confident in his ability to describe it. That certainty is what continues to keep the case alive decades later, raising questions about whether time itself can shift and bend in unexpected places. The Versailles time slip? On a summer afternoon in 1901, two English women, Charlotte Ann Moyley and Eleanor Zerden, walked through the vast grounds of the Palace of Versailles, expecting nothing more than an ordinary visit to the famous estate. Yet, what they later described would spark more than a century of debate. Both were well-educated, respected academics, and neither had a reputation for superstition or fanciful invention. Their plan was simple: to explore the gardens, take in the scenery, and enjoy the historical grandeur of the French court. What happened instead became one of the most famous claims of a time slip ever recorded. As they wandered down the shaded paths near the Petit-Trian, the smaller estate within Versailles, once favoured by Marie Antoinette, they began to notice an odd stillness settle over the grounds, as though the atmosphere itself had shifted. The lively chatter of tourists and the sounds of the breeze in the trees seemed to fade, replaced by an oppressive silence that made their surroundings feel strangely hollow. Both later admitted to feeling an inexplicable sense of unease, as though they had stepped into a stage set rather than a real breathing landscape. Walking further, they encountered figures who did not look like ordinary visitors. The first was a man in a long, old-fashioned cloak with a broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. His expression was unfriendly, even hostile, and he directed them along a path with a curt gesture. The women were struck not only by his unusual attire, but also by the fact that his presence felt out of place, as if he belonged to another century entirely. They pressed on, their unease growing, until they came across other individuals whose appearance deepened their confusion. A woman and a girl in dresses of 18th century fashion passed before them, seemingly oblivious to the oddity of their own clothing in the modern age. The scene unfolded with a vividness that both women later recalled in meticulous detail. The fabrics, the colors, the way the sunlight glinted against the material of the gowns, all etched sharply in their memory. It was as if they had stumbled into a world frozen in time. Contemporary research later revealed that some of the features Mobili and Jordan described, such as a small footbridge and a garden kiosk, did in fact exist at Versailles during Marie Antoinette's time, but had disappeared or fallen into obscurity by 1901. The accuracy of these details puzzled historians because neither woman was an expert on French royal estates, and some of what they mentioned was not widely documented until years after their visit. This suggested that their impressions were not simply drawn from popular imagery of the French court, but contained knowledge that would have been extremely difficult for casual visitors to know. The most striking moment came when Moily described seeing a woman seated on a stool near the Petit Triangle, sketching in the grass. The figure wore a light summer dress with a wide-brimmed hat, her features marked by an air of melancholy detachment. Mobley became convinced that she was looking directly at Marouanet herself, caught in a moment before the Queen's world would collapse into revolution and tragedy. The encounter was so powerful that Moy could recall the exact contours of the woman's face years later. Even when she tried to dismiss the impression as imagination, eventually the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The silence gave way once more to the ordinary sounds of a tourist site, and the figures they had glimpsed seemed to vanish into thin air. Stunned and unsettled, Moy and Jourdain left Versailles that day, unable to fully explain what they had experienced. But in the weeks that followed, their discussions only deepened their conviction that they had slipped into another time. Years later, in 1911, they published their account under the title An Adventure, using the pseudonyms Elizabeth Morrison and Francis Lamont. The book detailed their strange walk through Versailles, the uncanny figures they encountered, and the inexplicable feeling of being transported into the era of the French Revolution. The publication sparked fierce debate, with critics accusing them of inventional hysteria, while supporters hailed it as one of the most credible cases of time displacement ever recorded. One explanation offered by skeptics was that they had mistaken costume performers or a staged event for something extraordinary. Yet, no such performance was documented on the day of their visit, and the accuracy of their descriptions, down to architectural details of the gardens and outbuildings that were not well known to the public at the time, was difficult to dismiss. Others suggested that psychological stress or shared hallucination might have explained the vision, though neither woman had a history of instability or delusion. Adding to the mystery, later archival research uncovered inconsistencies in official records of that day at Versailles. No events were scheduled at the Petit Triangle, and guides who were present reported nothing unusual. Yet the women insisted that certain paths and gates appeared arranged differently than they had on previous visits. Some scholars speculated that shifts in the layout of the grounds could have contributed to a sense of disorientation, while others pointed out that Moy and Jourdain's notes matched maps of the gardens as they had appeared more than a century earlier. Over the decades, their testimony became a cornerstone in the study of time slips, a phenomenon in which individuals report experiencing sudden, vivid displacements into another era. For believers, the Moyle Jordan incident stands as a compelling piece of evidence that time is not as rigid as it seems, that under certain conditions, the past can bleed through into the present. For skeptics, it remains a fascinating case of perception, memory, and suggestion. The enduring nature of the story comes not only from the vivid detail with which the two women described their strange walk, but also the fact that they stood by their account until the end of their lives, never retracting a word. Both maintained that what they saw at Versailles was not imagination nor fantasy, but a true glimpse into the past. And so the tale continues to echo more than a century later, leaving behind a haunting question. For a brief walk on a summer afternoon, did two women really step into the dying days of a queen's world? Or did their minds simply conjure a ghost of history too vivid to ignore? The case of Rudolph Fentz. On a warm June night in New York City in 1951, the quiet of Times Square was broken by a sudden commotion when a man appeared out of nowhere in the middle of traffic, seemingly confused and disoriented. Witnesses described him as wearing clothes that did not match the period at all, with a high-collared coat, a vest, and tall shoes that looked closer to the style of the 19th century than the modern post-war era. The man froze in the glare of headlights, terrified and unsure of where he was, and before anyone could help him, a speeding car struck him down, leaving him fatally injured on the street. He carried no modern identification, only strange belongings that baffled the police who soon arrived at the scene. The coroner's office took his body in, and detectives began sorting through the items in his pockets, which seemed like relics of another time. There was a copper token for a beer, worth 5 cents from a saloon no one had heard of in years, a bill from a stable false heir, and a letter postmarked in 1876 from Philadelphia. His watch was an old-fashioned type, one that had not been made in decades, and his clothing, though in good condition, was stitched in a style long outdated. None of these things appeared worn or aged, as though they had been preserved perfectly from another century. The police expected to find at least one ordinary piece of identification, something that would place him in the current year. But there was nothing at all to suggest that this man belonged to 1951. The name Rudolph Fentz appeared in some of his papers, and investigators took it as a starting point. They ran his name through records and asked around for missing persons, but nothing surfaced to link him to the present day. What did appear, however, was an old file from the late 19th century. A man named Rudolph Fentz had been reported missing in New York in 1876 after stepping out of his home one evening for a walk and never returning. At the time, his disappearance was considered one of the city's many unsolved cases with no explanation and no evidence to suggest where he'd gone. Now, nearly 75 years later, a man carrying his name and belongings turned up dead in the middle of Times Square. Detectives interviewed older relatives of the missing man and confirmed that the clothing, the handwriting, and the possessions matched those of the man who had vanished generations earlier. If this was the same person, then he had somehow crossed from 1876 into 1951 without aging, appearing in the heart of the city only moments before his death. The case notes described the investigation as thorough, yet it left the police with no rational explanation. How could someone step out into the night in one century and arrive suddenly in another? In New York, the story of Rudolph Fentz circulated rapidly. Newspapers carried brief reports of the strange accident, though the details remained vague, leaving space for rumor and speculation. Some people believed it to be proof of time travel, evidence that individuals could somehow slip between eras without warning. Others dismissed it as a mix-up, arguing that it was either a hoax or a mistaken identity that had been exaggerated. Still, the consistency of the objects found on him and the old missing persons record made the case more difficult to dismiss than many wanted to admit. In the eyes of skeptics, what began as a curious anecdote likely swelled into legend, with the Rudolph Fentz story expanding in detail over the years. Yet, investigators who saw the body and the possessions at the time insisted that the details were accurate and could not easily be explained away. They argued that the items in his pocket were not antiques purchased from a shop, but everyday tools that had crossed decades untouched. To them, it looked as if he had truly stepped from one street into another, separated by nearly a lifetime. Well into the future, the case continued to appear in books about the paranormal and unexplained phenomena, where it was often presented as one of the clearest examples of time displacement. In these accounts, Rudolf Fentz was described as a man who unknowingly walked into a fold in time, vanishing from his family's sight in the 19th century, only to reappear in the chaos of mid-10th century traffic. The tragic detail of his death gave the story an eerie finality, as though the world had no place for a man out of step with history. Other researchers argued that the case might have been inspired by fiction rather than fact, noting that a similar story appeared in old magazines years after the supposed event. This raised questions about whether the story of Rudolf Fentz was a legend that had blended into urban history, repeated so often that it became accepted as truth. Yet even among those who doubted its authenticity, the fascination remained strong because the tale struck at a universal fear and wonder. The possibility of suddenly losing one's place in time and arriving somewhere completely foreign. The image of a bewildered man in outdated clothes, blinking in confusion as the neon lights of Times Square shone around him, stayed alive in the public imagination. He seemed to embody the fragile boundary between past and present, as if history itself might fold and overlap in ways no one could predict. Whether a true case or an elaborate invention, the story of Rudolf Fentz continues to be told as one of the strangest accounts of a person who did not belong to the world in which he was found. Up to the present, when skeptics dissect the details and historians search for origins in fiction, there remains a small part of the tale that resists explanation. The careful inventory of his belongings, the missing persons report from 1876, and the timing of his sudden death line up too neatly for some to dismiss as a coincidence. For others, it stands as a warning about how quickly stories can grow into legend. Either way, the man known as Rudolf Fentz remains a ghost of New York's past, a figure caught between two centuries whose brief and mysterious reappearance left behind more questions than answers. The Moy Jordan encounter. It began as a simple outing meant to fill a warm afternoon when Charlotte Ann Moy and Elena Jordan left the crowds behind at Versailles and wandered into the quieter paths that surrounded the palace. Both women were teachers at St. Hugh's College in Oxford, serious and respectable in their work, and neither was known for fanciful stories. Yet, as they walked together through the shaded lanes of the gardens on that day in August 1901, they began to sense that something in the atmosphere was subtly wrong, as though the air itself had changed, and the familiar sounds of a modern park had been replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural. They continued along the path, searching for the Petit Trianon, and noticed that the world around them seemed to take on a dull quality, almost like a painting where the colors had drained of life. The sunlight that had earlier been bright seemed muted now, and the trees stood in a way that felt heavy and oppressive. Even the people they passed appeared strange. A man in a cloak and broad-brimmed hat watched them closely, his expression dark and unsettling, and his clothing was nothing like what one would expect in the early years of the 20th century. Another figure, dressed in rough work clothes, pointed them further along the way, though his manner felt odd, as if he were part of a scene that belonged to another age entirely. As they pressed on, Moy and Jourdain both felt a growing unease that neither could explain, though neither admitted it aloud at the time. It was not only the strangeness of the people they encountered, but also the overwhelming sense that they had walked into a world that was not their own. The sounds of insects, footsteps on gravel, or voices of other tourists were absent, replaced instead by a heavy silence that seemed to draw them deeper into the grounds. Then on the lawn before the Petit Triangle, Moy noticed a woman seated and sketching. She wore an elaborate dress and a wide-brimmed hat of 18th century style, her expression serious and absorbed in her work. The image burned itself into Mobile's mind, so vivid that she would later recall it with perfect clarity, convinced that she had been looking at Marie Antoinette herself. When they finally reached the Petit Triangle, everything seemed to return suddenly to normal. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Modern visitors reappeared and the gardens once again looked like the Versailles known to tourists of the 20th century. Both women were shaken by what they had just experienced. Though at first they spoke of it only in fragments, they returned to England unsettled, each unsure of what had happened, but unable to dismiss the feeling that they had briefly crossed into another time. In the weeks that followed, the two women compared their memories, carefully piecing together the details. To their astonishment, they realized that they had both seen the same figures, felt the same oppressive stillness, and noticed the same changes in light and sound. Jourdain, who had walked slightly ahead at times, remembered the same man in the cloak and the same eerie silence. Mobile could still see the woman by the Trianon as though she was standing before her. Convinced that their shared account was too detailed to be imagination, they began researching the history of Versailles, hoping to match what they saw with known events of the past. Their study led them to historical records of August 1792, a time when the French Revolution had turned violent and the monarchy was crumbling. It was said that Marie Antoinette had spent her final days of freedom at the Petit Triangle, retreating there to sketch and find some peace from the turmoil in Paris. The clothing, described by Mobile, matched portraits of the Queen in those years, and the men they had seen bore a resemblance to Revolutionary Guards who patrolled the grounds. The women began to believe that what they had experienced was not a vision or a dream, but an actual glimpse of that long-lost moment in French history. In 1911, after years of keeping the story private, they published a book titled An Adventure, writing under the pseudonym Elizabeth Morrison and Francis Lamont. The book described their strange walk through Versailles in meticulous detail, presenting it not as a work of fiction but as a factual account. Readers were divided. Some were enthralled, convinced that the women had stumbled into a genuine time slip, while others dismissed the story as imagination suggestion. Critics pointed out that memory can distort and that the brain can fill in gaps with images, borrowed from history or art. Skeptics suggested that the women might have encountered a reenactment or stumbled upon actors in costume. Though no record of such an event existed for that day, its lasting impact came not. That did not explain. The empty expanse left by the vanished village did not go unnoticed by travelers passing through. Some claimed to see fleeting images of figures moving among the fields as though the villagers had become shadows, glimpsed just long enough to vanish again. A shepherd named Friedrich, who had slept in the nearby woods that night, swore he saw the entire village intact at midnight, lights flickering in windows and smoke rising from chimneys. By dawn, it was gone, and he could not convince others that what he saw was real. Reports like his were dismissed by authorities as exaggeration. Yet, the descriptions were remarkably consistent, suggesting that something extraordinary had occurred rather than simple hallucination. Local historians who later investigated Lang's disappearance found that the village appeared in no official records beyond the mid-1840s, as though it had existed only briefly in memory and then been erased from maps. Letters and documents recovered from nearby towns referred to Lang as a typical farming community, but all references stopped abruptly in August 1847. Attempts to locate any descendants of the villages failed, and church records from the surrounding area contained no trace of baptisms, marriages or deaths from Lang after that year. Even property deeds indicated the land was vacant, as though the village had been unbuilt rather than destroyed. Some theorists proposed natural explanations, such as a sudden landslide or flooding, but the topography of the hills and the lack of physical evidence made such ideas unlikely. Others suggested the villages may have migrated en masse to another region, but no neighboring settlements reported an influx of people that could account for an entire village. The disappearance was total. Homes, families, animals, and belongings vanished together, leaving nothing but empty land. Scholars who visited the site decades later noted that the grass and wildflowers grew unnaturally fast, covering the area where houses once stood, as though nature itself sought to erase the memory of the settlement. Eyewitness testimonies from surrounding villages added a layer of unease. Farmers working in nearby fields reported seeing smoke from chimneys and hearing the distant sounds of bells and voices the night Lang disappeared. Some claimed to catch glimpses of figures in period clothing walking along the paths that once led to the village. These apparitions were never consistent enough to follow, but they reinforced the idea that Lang had not simply been abandoned. There was a sense among these witnesses that the village existed in some other layer of reality, glimpsed only briefly before retreating into an unseen dimension. By the early 20th century, the story of Lang became part of local folklore, passed down in hushed tones as a warning of forces beyond human understanding. Scholars of the paranormal began to take an interest, suggesting that Lang might be an example of a time slip or dimensional displacement, where an entire settlement was shifted out of ordinary reality. Some researchers compared it to other unexplained vanishings, noting similarities in how the land was preserved in memory and brief sightings, as though the fabric of time itself had folded and hidden the village from the world. Hard evidence for the story of Lang remained maddeningly scarce despite its status as a legend. Archaeologists who examined the area found no remains of buildings or artifacts dating to the 1840s, and soil analysis revealed nothing unusual that could account for the sudden disappearance. Satellite images and modern surveys confirmed that the land had been untouched for decades with no hidden structures or signs of human habitation. The totality of the erasure, combined with eyewitness accounts, made the mystery all the more compelling. Lang seemed to have been removed not by human hands or natural disaster, but by something far stranger and more inexplicable. Fascination with the disappearance of Lang extends across historians, researchers, and fans of unexplained phenomena. Some suggest that the village might still exist in another plane of existence, visible only to those who cross into it at the right moment. Others theorize that the event could be an early documented case of a collective time slip, where multiple lives and structures moved through time together. Whatever the truth, the story remains an unsettling reminder of how fragile our perception of reality can be and how little control humanity may have over the flow of time. Though the village disappeared overnight, the hills where Lang once stood remain calm and unassuming, a grassy expanse betraying no past activity. Tourists and locals alike pass the area without realizing its history, yet the story endures in old records, folklore, and the memories of witnesses who saw the village before it vanished. The disappearance of Lang stands as one of the most profound and enigmatic cases of an entire settlement removed from the world, leaving behind questions that may never be answered, and a haunting possibility that time itself can hide what it chooses. The Johan Nordqvist story. Having Nordqvist had never considered himself a man destined for the extraordinary. In the quiet suburb of Västerås, Sweden, he lived an ordinary life working as a plumber and spending his weekends with his family. It was a chilly spring evening in 2006 when he decided to take a short walk through the wooded area behind his home, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through the trees, and he noticed a small clearing that seemed unusually still. Curious, he stepped closer, his boots crunching against fallen leaves. That is when he first saw the man. The figure looked remarkably familiar, though Johan couldn't immediately place him. Dressed in modern casual clothes, the man seemed out of place in the tranquil forest. Hawan called out a greeting, expecting the figure to respond like anyone else would. To his astonishment, the man turned and spoke, and the voice sounded exactly like his own. At first, Hawan laughed nervously, convinced he was witnessing some kind of prank or strange optical illusion. But the reflection in the man's eyes mirrored his own experiences. The same weight of exhaustion from a day of work and an unmistakable sense of presence that no stranger could replicate. Hawan's disbelief grew as the man began to speak more directly, describing details of Hawan's daily life that no one else could know. He recounted specific events from the past few months. The leak he had fixed under his neighbor's kitchen sink, the precise arrangement of tools in his workshop, even a conversation he had with his wife just that morning. Each revelation sent chills through Hawan's body. The man in front of him was not just a stranger. It was him, his own future self, seemingly transported decades into the past. The initial shock gave way to a mixture of fascination and fear. Hawan tried to ask questions, but he quickly realized that his visitor was cautious, avoiding direct explanations of how he had arrived there. Instead, he focused on warnings and instructions, urging Hawan to pay attention to small decisions that could affect the course of his life. The future Hawan emphasized a few seemingly trivial actions: repairing a faulty light switch in a specific way, choosing a certain path while walking home, and keeping a careful track of minor financial transactions. These instructions seemed mundane, yet the urgency in his voice made it clear they were significant. Over several hours, the two Hawans interacted in an almost seamless manner. They talked about family, work, and hobbies. Yet, underneath the ordinary conversation was an extraordinary tension. Every sentence carried weight, every gesture a subtle warning. The future Hawan shared glimpses of events yet to come, from routine days at the plumbing company to personal milestones that would shape Hawan's character. Despite the surreal nature of the encounter, Hawan found himself absorbing every detail, knowing that the information was impossible to obtain through ordinary means. At one point, the future Hawan revealed an event that shocked him to his core. A minor accident in the near future that would have serious consequences if ignored. He described exactly how it would happen and advised Hawan to act preemptively to prevent it. The precision of the account combined with a calm but serious tone left Hawan with no doubt that this was more than a dream or coincidence. Every detail matched reality in a way that defied explanation, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. The encounter lasted into the night. As darkness settled over the forest, the future Hawan's presence began to fade. Before departing, he made one final statement, urging Hawan to remember that small choices can ripple across time, altering events in ways that cannot be easily predicted. Then he simply disappeared, leaving Hawan alone in the clearing. The silence of the forest felt deafening, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath in response to what had just occurred. Hawan stood motionless, grappling with the reality that he'd conversed with a version of himself from decades ahead. In the days following the encounter, Hawan tried to process what had happened. He recounted the story to his wife, who listened with a mixture of skepticism and concern. Friends and colleagues were less receptive, dismissing his experience as stress-induced imagination or a vivid dream. Yet, Hawan remained certain that what he'd witnessed was real. He began documenting the details meticulously, noting every word and gesture of his future self, hoping to find patterns or explanations that could make sense of the impossible. As he reflected on the experience, Hawan realized that the encounter had altered his perception of life. He became more attentive to everyday choices, more deliberate in his actions, and more conscious of consequences that previously seemed trivial. The knowledge imparted by his future self, while cryptic at times, provided guidance that Hawan could not ignore. He carried a quiet sense of urgency, knowing that the ripples of time were far-reaching and that even minor decisions could have profound effects on the future. Hawkins' story attracted attention after he shared it online and with local media, generating debate among skeptics and believers alike. Some dismissed it as a hoax or a psychological anomaly, while others speculated about the possibility of time travel or parallel realities. Scientists and paranormal investigators examined the account, but could offer no satisfactory explanation for how a person could meet a future version of themselves with such precise knowledge. Despite the skepticism, Howan remained consistent in his account, never exaggerating or altering the details. The clarity and specificity of his story lent it a credibility that few other time-related encounters could match. In hindsight, Hawkins' thoughts of the incident were never haunted by fear, only tempered by a quiet awe for the strange forces that had touched his life. He understood that time, in some mysterious way, had momentarily folded back on itself, allowing him to glimpse a version of himself that had not yet lived. The encounter became a cornerstone of his understanding of choice and consequence, a reminder that life is shaped not only by significant events, but by the subtle, often unnoticed decisions that accumulate over time. The Howan Nordqvist story remains one of the most compelling accounts of personal time travel, a documented moment when past and future briefly converged in a quiet Swedish forest. The time-displaced soldier of World War II. In a quiet village in Normandy, France, the year was 1942, and life was strained under the ongoing pressures of World War II. Villagers had grown accustomed to rationing, curfews, and the occasional patrol, but nothing prepared them for what would appear one misty morning near the edge of the forest. A man emerged from the tree-line, moving with a hesitant but purposeful stride. He wore a uniform unlike any the villagers had seen in the ongoing conflict. Instead of the familiar grey or khaki, his attire resembled the style of soldiers from decades earlier, complete with brass buttons, a high-coloured tunic, and polished boots that looked closer to the turn of the century than the 1940s. Those who first noticed him thought he might be a deserter or an eccentric wandering soldier. But as they approached, the man's mannerisms, speech, and knowledge quickly revealed a deeper strangeness. He spoke in French, yet the words were tinged with an older dialect unfamiliar to even the eldest villagers. When asked where he had come from, he offered only cryptic references to battles and campaigns that no one recognized, events that had not yet occurred. The local baker, Misul Fev, recalled the man describing a place called Sidon with startling clarity, mentioning details of engagements that would only happen years later in the Second World War. Unease settled over the villagers. They invited him to stay in the old mill house on the outskirts of town, hoping he could rest and recover from what they assumed must be fatigue or injury. He accepted without hesitation, yet his behavior remained peculiar. He seemed disoriented at night, staring at the stars as though trying to recognize constellations that had changed in position. He avoided discussions of recent events, instead speaking of leaders, uniforms, and weapons that seemed both familiar and anachronistic. Some claimed that when he held a rifle, he examined it as though it were the only one he had ever known. Yet, it did not match any standard issue model used by the French or German armies in 1942. The villagers' recollections pointed to subtle anomalies in his appearance that didn't quite add up. His face, though rugged and sunburned, did not show the fatigue of a man who had endured the hardships of modern trench warfare. He carried no identificational papers, and his belongings were sparse, consisting mainly of a leather satchel, a pocket compass, and a small notebook filled with meticulous notes on tactics, troop movements, and dates that did not align with the current year. Villagers began to whisper that he might have traveled through time, a concept that seemed absurd, even as they could not explain his presence. It wasn't long before the local authorities noticed the soldier wandering through this village. disoriented and asking about what he called the front lines. A gendarme attempted to question him, and the man gave responses that were partially coherent, but mostly contradictory. He spoke of towns and battles with names familiar to historical records, but in an order that defied the established timeline. When pressed for clarification, he grew agitated, insisting that he'd come from a place that no longer existed in the current day. Yet his tone suggested he believed this was ordinary, not extraordinary. Evidence of the strange occurrences extended beyond one village, as archival research revealed that other towns in Normandy had recorded comparable events. In several cases, witnesses described a soldier appearing suddenly in uniform from a previous era, speaking in a mix of modern and old French and then disappearing after a few hours or days. Though official documentation was scarce, oral histories passed down by families suggested a pattern. These soldiers did not belong to any known military unit and seemed disconnected from the events of their apparent time. In the case of the Normandy soldier, the villagers kept him in the mill house for a week, hoping he might regain his bearings or recall where he came from. During that time, they observed behaviors that were simultaneously ordinary and uncanny. He ate meals with discipline, attended to chores, and even helped to repair fences. Yet, he often became lost in thought, staring at old maps as if they contained secret routes he knew by memory. Children were both frightened and fascinated by him, noting the way he seemed to fade into the shadows when no adult was watching. By the end of the week, the soldier vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. Some claimed he walked into the mist that often rolled through the hills at dawn, never to be seen again. Others suggested he was taken by military authorities or perhaps escaped into the surrounding countryside. Despite searches, no trace of him was ever found, and the items he had carried disappeared along with him. Only the memories of the villagers and a few hastily sketched notes remained, recording the baffling details of his presence. Later generations kept the story alive through letters, diaries, and interviews with those whose ancestors had witnessed the soldier. Many of those who had witnessed him as children described a lingering sense of unreality, a feeling that their encounter had been with someone who existed outside the ordinary flow of time. Scholars who studied the accounts noted that the level of detail in his descriptions, battles, towns, military formations was precise enough to suggest knowledge beyond ordinary speculation, yet not fully aligned with any historical record at the time of his appearance. Ideas about the soldier's origins range from plausible to extraordinary. Some propose that he was genuinely displaced from a past era, perhaps caught in an unexplained time slip or anomaly connected to the war. Others argue that he could have been a spy, a deserter, or someone with advanced knowledge seeking to manipulate local villages. Though no evidence supports these ideas, a small number of researchers suggest that the soldier's appearance may have been the result of a shared hallucination or psychological phenomenon triggered by fear and uncertainty during wartime. Yet even skeptics acknowledge the consistency of the multiple eyewitness accounts as difficult to ignore. Above all, the Normandy incident is chilling because the soldier's presence was so fleeting, vanishing almost as soon as it began. To the villagers, he was real, present, and tangible, interacting with them and performing ordinary tasks while simultaneously exhibiting knowledge and behavior that seemed impossible for his era. He left no legacy other than the stories passed down through families, and no documents or objects survived to provide further clues. His sudden presence stands as a reminder of the fragile line between past and present, and the possibility that time may sometimes behave in ways beyond human comprehension. The hills of Normandy still seem to echo the events of that strange week in 1942, when a soldier dressed in an unfamiliar uniform appeared and then disappeared without a trace. Locals continue to recount the tale, passing it to younger generations with the same mixture of awe and unease. Whether the soldier was truly displaced through time or whether the event was an extraordinary coincidence, The story persists as one of the most perplexing accounts of unexplained phenomena during World War II, a glimpse of history intruding into the present in a way no one could fully understand. The man who checked into a hotel in 1996, in the spring of 1996, a businessman named Richard Lawson was traveling through a small town in the Midwest for a series of meetings. Exhausted after a long day of travel, he decided to find a place to stay overnight. Settling on a modest hotel he spotted along the main street. The exterior looked ordinary with faded brickwork and a flickering neon sign, but something about it drew him in. The lobby was quiet, almost unnervingly so, and smelled faintly of old wood polish. Behind the front desk stood an elderly man who wore a neatly pressed suit, though it seemed to belong to another era. He greeted Richard warmly, handed over a brass key, and directed him to room 214 on the second floor. Richard took the narrow staircase rather than the elevator, noting the unusual wallpaper and dark wooden banisters. Each step creaked beneath his weight, echoing through the empty corridor. When he reached the room, he paused, struck by its appearance. The furniture looked as if it had been lifted straight from a photograph of the 1920s. The bed had a heavy quilted cover, and the nightstands were topped with ornate lamps that flickered faintly as though the bulbs had aged along with the room. On the desk, a rotary phone sat alongside a small inkwell, and a faded calendar hung on the wall. Its last date marked 1928. Richard initially assumed it was a themed room, perhaps part of a nostalgic hotel renovation, and chuckled to himself as he set down his briefcase. As he settled in, he noticed details that unsettled him. The air smelled faintly of tobacco smoke and aged paper, though no one else seemed to be present. The curtains were thick and heavy, blocking most of the modern light from the outside, leaving the room in a soft amber glow. Richard tried to turn on the television, but it made only a low, static hum, refusing to display a picture. Even the clock on the nightstand seemed stuck, its hands frozen at 11:45. Despite the strangeness, he told himself he'd been traveling too much, that his mind was playing tricks after days of back-to-back flights and meetings. The evening passed slowly. Richard explored the room carefully, running his fingers over the smooth wood of the dresser and the faded carpet underfoot. He opened the drawers, expecting modern amenities, but found only antique stationery and a thin layer of dust. The hotel felt like it existed outside of time. Dinner in the small hotel dining area offered no relief. The staff, all elderly and dressed in similar early-century attire, seemed polite but oddly distant. Their conversations hinted at local history rather than current events, referencing names and events from decades before. Richard felt increasingly aware of how isolated he was, the modern world seeming to recede the further he stayed within the building. That night, he attempted to sleep, but was restless. The quiet of the hotel seemed unnatural, and every creak or whisper of wind against the window amplified his unease. As he lay in bed, he recalled the old calendar on the wall, the rotary phone and the flickering lamps. It struck him that nothing in the room had belonged to the 1990s. Despite his exhaustion, he felt compelled to rise and examine the hallway again. Even the hallway itself seemed different, longer and narrower than it had appeared earlier, with shadows that shifted as if they were alive. He returned to the room and tried to rationalize everything, reminding himself that unusual hotel rooms existed and that novelty suites were not uncommon. The following morning, Richard checked out with the same polite conversation that had occurred the day before. He approached the front desk, ready to pay the bill, only to find the elderly man gone. In his place was a younger receptionist dressed in modern clothing, who looked at him with confusion. Richard mentioned his room 214 and asked if it was available for last night. The receptionist frowned.
"Room 214?
She asked. "There is no room 214, that number doesn't exist in our hotel." Bewildered, Richard insisted, describing the hallway, the furniture, even the old calendar he'd seen on the wall. The receptionist shook her head and told him the hotel's records had no indication of such a room. and that the hotel had not changed its layout in decades. Richard left the hotel in a daze, the streets bright with morning traffic and the sounds of contemporary life. He tried to find a rational explanation. Perhaps he'd slept through renovations. Or maybe the room had been closed for years, yet every detail remained etched in his memory. The lamps, the rotary phone, the smell of aged tobacco, and the sense that he had stepped into another time entirely. Over the following weeks, he attempted to research the hotel's history, visiting the local library and speaking with long-time residents. No one remembered a room frozen in the 1920s, and no newspaper articles or photographs provided any confirmation of its existence. The more Richard investigated, the more mysterious it became. Hotel blueprints showed no indication of a missing room, and interviews with staff, past and present, confirmed that no unusual renovations had occurred. Some locals hinted at old legends, stories of buildings that shifted or disappeared, and travelers who had vanished only to return with strange tales. Richard could not explain how he had encountered a room that seemingly existed outside the present, nor why it had vanished without a trace. The experience haunted him in small ways. He would sometimes see antique furniture in modern settings and feel a pang of recognition, or smell tobacco and old wood and remember the hotel room that had briefly belonged to another era. Discussions about Richard's experience appeared years later in online communities, fascinated by events that defy explanation. Skeptics dismissed it as a vivid imagination or a misremembered dream, but those interested in time anomalies found it compelling. The specificity of his account, the calendar, the rotary phone, the staff dressed in decades-old attire, made it stand out among more generic time-slip reports. Even without definitive proof, the memory remained vivid and precise, as though his mind had captured a fragment of reality that defied conventional understanding. Looking back, Richard admitted that the experience had changed him. He became more attentive to the present, more aware of how fragile and fleeting everyday moments could be. The hotel room from 1928, which had disappeared so suddenly, served as a constant reminder of how reality might be more fluid than it appeared. For Richard, the encounter was not frightening, but it was deeply unsettling. A personal proof that time might fold in on itself in ways that the human mind struggles to comprehend. The story of the man who checked into a hotel in 1996 remains one of the most compelling accounts of a fleeting encounter with the past. A reminder that the world can hold moments where time itself seems to pause, if only for a night. The Air Marshal's future city. Lieutenant Mark Daniels had spent most of his career in the Air Force flying reconnaissance missions over the Pacific Ocean. In early 1983, he was assigned a routine patrol flight from Guam to a remote set of coordinates for a mapping exercise. The sky was unusually clear that morning, with only faint wisps of clouds stretching across the horizon. Daniels leaned back in his seat, monitoring instruments and glancing at the endless expanse of blue below. It was the kind of flight where repetition could dull even the sharpest senses, and he allowed his mind to wander while keeping an eye on altitude and radar. Several hours into the flight, Daniels noticed a glimmer far below the plane. At first, he assumed it was the reflection of sunlight on water, but the shape and pattern did not match the ocean surface. He adjusted the plane's angle to get a closer look and was stunned to see structures rising out of the waves. From his vantage point, they appeared as a cluster of sleek towers stretching into the sky in a way that resembled no city he had ever studied. The buildings were metallic, reflecting light in brilliant shades of silver and blue, and their forms were geometric yet organic, almost as if designed to mimic nature. Daniels immediately checked his maps and navigational charts. No records indicated any city in that region, and he knew the area well enough to recognize it as a remote, uninhabited stretch of the Pacific. His training told him to question what he saw, to search for logical explanations such as optical illusions, mirages, or weather anomalies. Yet, None of the typical causes seemed to fit. The skyline persisted as he circled closer, and the clarity of the buildings suggested they were solid, permanent, and not a reflection or trick of light. He switched on the plane's recording instruments, documenting what he could, hoping that the footage might later reveal a rational explanation. The city appeared to have streets and bridges suspended above water with lights that shimmered even though it was daytime. Daniels could make out patterns that resembled parks or green spaces between the structures. It was as if the city had been built with a vision of harmony in mind, combining high technology with careful environmental design. The scale of it was breathtaking, and every detail seemed impossibly advanced for the year 1983. As he flew overhead, Daniels noticed vehicles moving along the elevated roads. They appeared aerodynamic, unlike any craft he'd seen before, gliding silently in perfect formation. He radioed his command center to report a possible navigational error. But the response was puzzled. No radar anomalies, no known installations, and no other aircraft in the area. Daniels double-checked the coordinates, confirming he was exactly where the maps indicated. Yet beneath him lay a city that should not exist. He tried to capture photographs, but the camera repeatedly malfunctioned, as though some force resisted recording the scene. Hovering over the city, Daniels took careful note of every odd and unexpected sight for several minutes. He saw towers that seemed to change shape slightly as he moved, almost like living architecture adjusting to wind currents. Bridges curved in ways that defied conventional engineering, and clusters of transparent domes appeared to cover portions of the city, hinting at habitats or protected zones. In the distance, he thought he could see structures resembling landing pads or towers extending into the clouds. The city radiated a sense of precision and order that contrasted sharply with the vast, empty ocean surrounding it. The initial exhilaration gave way to a mounting feeling of dread for Daniels. He had been trained to expect the unexpected in combat and reconnaissance, but this was different. Nothing in his experience could explain the city's existence, and the realization that he might be witnessing something decades ahead of its time weighed heavily on him. He made careful mental notes of the skyline, the layout, and the apparent technology, knowing that even if he reported it, skepticism would be inevitable. A story like this challenged the boundaries of belief, and he doubted anyone would take it seriously without clear evidence. As he prepared to leave the area, Daniels looked back one last time. The city shimmered under the afternoon sun, each tower reflecting light in ways that seemed almost otherworldly. He could not discern any inhabitants walking the streets, though the movement of vehicles suggested life. The structures appeared intact, fully functional, and yet there was no sign of any conventional society. It felt as if he'd stumbled across a vision of the future, an advanced metropolis that might not exist in any reality known to humans at the time. Once he returned to base, Daniels reported the encounter to his superiors, carefully documenting the flight path, coordinates, and observed details. Many dismissed it as a trick of light, a mirage caused by temperature layers over the water, or even stress-induced hallucination from hours of monotonous flying. Daniel stood by his account, insisting on the precision of his instruments and the clarity of what he saw. Attempts to verify the city via satellite imagery later proved inconclusive. Photographs either captured nothing unusual or were inexplicably obscured, reinforcing the mystery. Carefully and selectively, he recounted the events to a small circle of investigators who specialized in strange phenomena. He described the city's advanced architecture, its unusual vehicles, and the feeling of encountering a place that existed beyond the known timeline. Some theorists suggested that he'd witnessed a hidden civilization, a lost experimental city, or even a glimpse of the future itself. Others speculated that atmospheric anomalies might create temporary visual constructs, yet the level of detail he reported made such explanations difficult to accept. the city stayed alive in Daniel's memory, its details strikingly clear even decades later. He remembered the metallic towers, the curving bridges, and the quiet hum of movement across streets suspended over the water. The encounter left him with a sense of awe and unease, a reminder that the world might contain mysteries beyond human comprehension. He often wondered if the city was waiting somewhere in the future to be discovered, or if he had witnessed a fleeting anomaly that no one else would ever see. The story of the Air Marshal's future city became one of the most remarkable and enduring accounts of a possible time-related phenomenon, a rare instance where observation suggested that what is possible in the future might sometimes momentarily intersect with the present. The mystery of John Titor. In November 2000, an unusual figure appeared on internet forums posting under the name John Tito, claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036 sent back in time on a mission to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer from 1975. According to him, the model contained unique code necessary to fix problems with legacy computer systems in his time. What immediately drew attention was the clarity with which he described both his mission and the world he'd come from, a future that seemed distant yet frighteningly familiar. Tito's posts were detailed, almost technical, filled with explanations of the mechanics of time travel as he understood them. He described using a device capable of generating a tipless cylinder, which allowed him to create a miniature rotating black hole. This, he said, enabled travel between different points in space-time. Many readers struggled to understand his descriptions, but some with scientific backgrounds noted that his terminology, while simplified, contained concepts that aligned loosely with theoretical physics. The specificity of his explanation gave his claims a credibility that most internet hoaxes lacked. Over the following months, Tor shared more about the world he'd come from. He spoke of political unrest, civil conflicts, and the eventual collapse of society in the United States around 2004. His warnings were both precise and vague, often delivered in a matter-of-fact tone. He explained that his mission was limited and that he had only a brief window to retrieve the computer before returning to his own time. His posts included anecdotes about living conditions, cultural differences, and the technology of 2036, all described as part of a future shaped by decades of hardship and adaptation. Many people were skeptical, dismissing Titor as a clever hoaxer, using science fiction knowledge to craft an elaborate story. Yet others were drawn in by the consistency of his narrative, the patience with which he answered questions, and the way he seemed to anticipate skepticism. He engaged directly with forum users, correcting misunderstandings and offering additional details about his time machine, which he described as a vehicle mounted with powerful gravity generators and electronic circuitry capable of precise temporal navigation. For those who followed his posts closely, it was easy to lose the sense of doubt for a time, replaced by a quiet curiosity about whether someone could actually travel through time. Tito also made several predictions, some of which were minor, others more significant. He warned of a civil war in the United States beginning in 2004, followed by a sequence of events that would fragment the country into multiple regions. He mentioned technological developments, such as improved robotics and the prevalence of energy-efficient vehicles. Some of these smaller predictions, like the rapid spread of digital communication and portable computing, seemed to align with the early 2000s reality. Others, especially the political warnings, did not come true, leaving parts of his story unresolved and fueling debates about his authenticity. Perhaps the most striking element of Tit's posts was his unwavering claim that he originated from a parallel timeline. He explained that minor changes in history could create alternate realities, meaning that any alterations made in the past would not necessarily overwrite his own time. This claim was significant because it accounted for discrepancies between his warnings and the unfolding events in the early 2000s by framing his travels within the context of parallel universes. He avoided the problem of predicting the future too precisely, while also giving readers a reason to believe that time travel in theory could exist without catastrophic paradoxes. He went further, recounting personal experiences from a world scarred by war and struggling with the aftermath of technological collapse. He spoke of daily routines, the scarcity of resources, and the social structures that had formed after widespread conflict. In these posts, he conveyed both pride and resignation, as if he had accepted the challenges of his time, but understood the fragility of civilization. He occasionally mentioned family and friends, though these references were sparse and generalized, leaving readers with the sense that Tito's primary focus was his mission rather than personal matters. Throughout 2001 and into 2002, Tito continued to post, though his activity gradually decreased. His explanations became more philosophical, reflecting on the nature of time, choice, and destiny. He suggested that while human history might appear linear, it was in fact a series of branching possibilities, with countless potential outcomes existing simultaneously. This view reinforced his earlier statements about parallel timelines and hinted at a profound understanding of temporal mechanics, at least as he claimed to know them. His final posts before vanishing from the forums included both encouragement and caution. He urged readers to consider the consequences of technological reliance, environmental degradation, and social division. After his disappearance, the story of John Titor spread beyond the forums to books, articles, and online discussions. People debated whether he was a time traveler, a talented storyteller, or a combination of both. Skeptics pointed to inconsistencies, the lack of verifiable proof, and the failed predictions as evidence of a hoax. Believers argued that the level of technical detail combined with his personal anecdotes and consistent timeline made his story one of the most compelling modern claims of time travel. Over 2 decades later, Tito's posts continue to fascinate researchers, enthusiasts, and conspiracy theorists alike. What continues to fascinate about John Titor is the way his story intertwines a sudden disappearance with questions that challenge our understanding of time. If he truly came from 2036, his presence in the early 2000s offered a rare glimpse into a future shaped by conflict, technology, and human choice. If he were not a time traveler, the story still stands as a remarkable case of imagination intersecting with real-world scientific concepts, convincing enough to make people wonder whether time travel could exist. In either case, the legacy of John Titor endures, a haunting reminder that the line between past, present, and future may be more fragile than most people assume. The forums where Titor first emerged are still accessible, preserved as a digital monument to one of modern history's most famous time travel stories. Readers revisit his words, debate the plausibility of his descriptions, and speculate about what became of him after his final post. His story continues to challenge assumptions about history, technology, and the limits of human understanding, leaving an unresolved question at the heart of the legend. Whether John Titor was a visitor from the future, a masterful hoaxer, or something that exists somewhere in between, just beyond the reach of ordinary explanation. The London Tube Station Incident. In London, during the spring of 1984, Jonathan Pierce hurried along busy streets, heading toward a client meeting in the city. He had taken the Underground countless times and considered himself entirely familiar with its twists and tunnels. That evening, he entered a lesser-used station near Holborn, a quiet stop with only a few passengers lingering on the platforms. The lights flickered slightly as he descended the steps, and the familiar hum of trains moving beneath the city seemed more distant than usual. He adjusted his briefcase and checked his watch, noting that he still had 20 minutes before his meeting. The platform was nearly empty, with only a handful of commuters waiting for the next train. Jonathan noticed something unusual immediately. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke and something metallic, a scent he associated with older stations long decommissioned. The walls seemed different, darker and more ornate, with signs that bore lettering he did not recognize. Confused, he approached one of the benches and glanced at the station map. It appeared old, printed in a style he had never seen in the 1980s, and some of the destinations listed were stations that no longer existed or had never existed in his memory. A shiver ran down his spine as he wondered if he'd wandered into an abandoned section of the underground. As he waited, a train emerged from the tunnel, its carriages longer than a modern stock and painted in colors that had not been used for decades. Jonathan stepped toward it, intending to board, but something made him pause. The passengers inside looked different as well. They wore clothing that resembled fashions from the 1940s, hats, overcoats and dresses in muted colors. Their faces were pale, their expressions unreadable, and the way they moved suggested a world unfamiliar to him. Jonathan's instinct to turn back collided with curiosity, and he stepped forward anyway, finding himself drawn to the doorway. Once inside, the train felt heavier than usual, its vibrations muted, and the sound of wheels on tracks oddly subdued. Jonathan tried to speak to a fellow passenger, a man reading a newspaper, but the man did not acknowledge him. The paper's date caught Jonathan off guard. May 12th, 1943, he blinked. Certain he must be imagining things, yet every detail was visible and precise. The train lurched forward, and Jonathan gripped the strap above his head, attempting to comprehend the impossible. He realized that the station outside had disappeared, replaced by a long tunnel stretching into darkness. The advertisements along the walls featuring products and slogans from decades earlier. Panic mingled with fascination as Jonathan moved through the carriages, noting the subtle differences in technology. The lights were dimmer, the benches harder, and the doors operated differently. He tried to find a conductor or someone who could explain the situation, but the train moved in silence, stopping only briefly at stations that were unfamiliar yet meticulously maintained. Each stop seemed to belong to a London he had never known, a city frozen in a different era. He felt as though he had stepped through a crack in time, one that existed only within the underground's labyrinth of tunnels. At one station, Jonathan stepped off to explore. The platform looked polished and well kept, yet the announcements were in an older style of British English with cadences he had only read about in historical records. The commuters on the platform did not react to his presence, moving past him as though he were invisible. He checked his watch, but it no longer showed the correct year. The numbers flickered erratically, and the digital display was partially unreadable. Jonathan wandered through the station, noticing plaques with dates from the 1930s and 1940s, all maintained as if the station had been preserved perfectly for decades. He realized that no modern signage, no contemporary maps, existed anywhere in this place. Over the next hour, he tried repeatedly to return to his own time, seeking a train or a passage back to the station he had entered in 1984. Each attempt led him deeper into stations and tunnels that felt real, but did not exist on any map he knew. He began to note the architecture, the materials, and the trains themselves, documenting the differences in his mind. The encounter became more unsettling as he recognized that the city outside might not match the time inside the station. Streetlights glowed with oil lamps. Advertisements were hand-painted and distant carriages moved noiselessly across cobblestone streets, visible through small station windows. Finally, Jonathan found a small corridor that seemed to vibrate with the faint hum of electricity. He hesitated but stepped through, feeling the air shift around him. Moments later, he emerged onto a platform that looked modern with fluorescent lighting and tiled walls. Commuters waited impatiently for the next train, unaware of the impossible journey he had just taken. Jonathan checked his watch. The time and date matched what he remembered when he had first entered the station. Relief washed over him, but the memory of the vanished city below London lingered vividly. When he recounted the experience to friends and colleagues, skepticism was immediate. They suggested fatigue, stress, or a vivid dream caused by hours of travel and work. Jonathan insisted on every detail: the smells, the lights, the clothing, the precise dates he'd seen on newspapers and plaques. He returned to the station in the following weeks, but the platform appeared ordinary, with no trace of the time slip he had encountered. Historical records showed no evidence of the preserved stations he had visited, no tunnels left untouched for decades. Jonathan's account circulated among historians and enthusiasts of unexplained phenomena, generating debate and fascination. Some theorists proposed that the underground might have been a location where time occasionally folded, a hidden junction between eras. Others argued that Jonathan had accessed some forgotten preservation zone maintained by the city during wartime. Yet no documentation confirmed such a claim. The story remained an enigma, a rare case in which one individual seemed to traverse decades without leaving any trace for others to follow. It was not until much later that Jonathan acknowledged the lasting effect the experience had on him. Even after returning to his ordinary life, he found himself noticing historical details in unexpected places, appreciating the passage of time in a new way. The underground, a mundane part of daily life for millions, had revealed a layer of reality that defied explanation. For Jonathan, the station remained a personal reminder that the past might be closer than anyone imagines, sometimes hiding in plain sight beneath the city streets. The London Tube Station incident became one of the most intriguing accounts of time anomalies, where an ordinary man briefly stepped outside his own era and into a world that should have existed only in history books. The chronauts of the 1935 Japan train. In the early morning of April 12, 1935, a train departed from Takasaki Station in GMA Prefecture, Japan, carrying a mix of commuters, merchants, and students. The weather was calm at first, but as the train climbed into the mountains, a dense, unusual fog began to surround the tracks. Conductors and passengers alike described the mist as thick and almost unnatural, hanging so heavily that the familiar landscape disappeared entirely. Windows reflected only grey nothingness, and even the usual sounds of the train's wheels clattering over the rails seemed muffled, as if the world outside had been swallowed. Among the passengers was a young schoolteacher named Hiroshi Nakamura, traveling to visit family in the neighboring town of Maebashi. He later recounted that the fog seemed to stretch endlessly, and the train slowed under the impression that the tracks were obstructed, though nothing could be seen ahead. Conversations among travelers quieted, replaced by nervous glances and whispered speculation. Some claimed they felt as though the air had grown heavier, almost charged, and that time itself seemed to move differently within the carriage. Clocks on the train stopped working, and watches held in hands fell silent, their hands frozen in place. As the train pressed forward, strange phenomena intensified. Windows that had once reflected only grey fog began to flicker, showing glimpses of unfamiliar towns and buildings. A merchant named Kenji Stowe described seeing streetcars with electric lights far brighter than any of the technology known in 1935. Children pressed their faces to the windows and pointed at structures that seemed impossibly modern. Houses made of materials not yet common in Japan. Some of the older passengers dismissed these sights as tricks of the fog or imagination, but their unease grew when familiar landmarks continued to vanish and reappear in distorted forms. By the time the train approached a narrow mountain pass near the Kaina River, passengers claimed the fog had transformed into a shimmering haze, like sunlight refracted through crystal. The air inside the carriage felt charged, and those aboard could hear a faint humming, almost mechanical, that seemed to emanate from the fog itself. Hiroshi noted that the hum was accompanied by a vibration beneath the train, subtle but persistent, as though the rails were resonating with some unseen energy. Passengers reported sudden feelings of disorientation, with some unsure whether minutes or hours had passed. Suddenly the fog lifted. Outside the windows, everything looked normal again. Yet the train was not where anyone expected it to be. Towns along, The route were unrecognizable and modern structures lined the tracks, buildings, bridges, and signs that did not exist in 1935. One merchant swore he saw automobiles with designs that would only appear decades later. School children gasped at the presence of shops selling unfamiliar goods, and even the attire of people along the platform seemed advanced. Panic and confusion spread through their passengers. They had boarded the train expecting a routine trip, yet the world that greeted them was startlingly different. The train continued along the tracks, and by the time it finally pulled into Mabashi, local authorities and villagers were shocked to see it arrive at a time that did not match its schedule. Passengers reported that their watches had stopped and clocks in the train had lost all sense of continuity. Hiroshi and others recounted a strange feeling of lost hours, a gap they could not reconcile with the known passage of time. Despite being in familiar territory, the sense of dislocation lingered. People claimed that when they left the train, the towns they saw were closer to what would exist in the 1960s than in 1935. Though the train itself had supposedly remained on its original route, the passengers, still shaken, wrote extensive reports in the days after the journey. Newspapers at the time reported on the oddity, though with skepticism, suggesting that the passengers had suffered hallucinations brought on by fatigue or a strange weather phenomenon. Yet, the consistency in multiple testimonies made a simple explanation difficult. Merchants described goods in stores that could not have existed for decades. Students described classrooms that matched future designs, and Hiroshi noted architectural styles that had not yet been developed. Those who had witnessed the events in the fog swore to the vividness of what they saw. Among scholars, a theory took hold that the train's passage represented a fleeting overlap of distinct temporal realities. The dense mountain fog may have acted as a conduit, moving the train and its passengers through years in an instant, or at least allowing them to perceive a future version of their surroundings. While skeptics dismissed these ideas as fanciful, the sheer number of consistent eyewitness accounts and the shared experience of temporal distortion kept the story alive in local lore. Even decades later, descendants of the passengers retold the events with reverence, noting how their elders described landscapes, technologies and clothing decades ahead of their time. The unusual incidents were not limited to the train itself. Local villagers remembered witnessing odd occurrences that day as well. Farmers tending fields near the tracks claimed to see a train move silently through the fog, appearing and disappearing in a manner that made it impossible to track its progress. Others saw figures inside the train who seemed to flicker or blur as though caught between moments. Reports of a low, resonant hum accompanying the fog were mentioned in several interviews, lending an eerie consistency to the accounts. No matter how extensively it was studied by authorities at the time or historians later, the mystery persisted. The tracks remained intact. Weather conditions were ordinary aside from the fog, and the train itself had no mechanical anomalies that could account for the events. The testimonies of passengers were detailed and consistent, making the idea of a hoax difficult to sustain. The legend of the 1935 train persisted as a compelling example of an unexplained time anomaly, a moment when ordinary travel intersected with something beyond comprehension. Gunma's Mountains and the old railways remain silent witnesses to the strange events of that morning. Local historians occasionally revisit the story, piecing together maps, weather records, and passenger testimonies. The train's journey remains a haunting question. Whether the passengers glimpsed the future, were briefly displaced in time, or experienced a collective perception that defied conventional understanding. Regardless of explanation, the event stands as one of the most fascinating examples of a possible real-life time slip, where the line between present and future blurred, leaving witnesses forever changed. The 1935 Japan train story continues to captivate researchers of time anomalies, suggesting that even the most ordinary moments can collide with the extraordinary. Passengers who survived the experience spoke of awe and fear, describing a world they had glimpsed but could not fully inhabit. Their accounts endure as a reminder that time may be far less rigid than it appears, and that in rare, unexplained moments, the boundaries of past, present, and future can fold in ways that challenge human understanding. The Man from Torrid. On a warm summer evening in 1954, a man appeared at Tokyo's Haneda Airport whose presence would later spark bewilderment and debate around the world. The customs officers at the time were accustomed to travelers from every corner of the globe, yet this man seemed different. He presented himself confidently, speaking fluent Japanese and carrying a passport from a country he claimed was called Torrid. The officials were initially polite, checking the documents carefully, but their confusion grew as they tried to locate the nation on any map. No record existed of such a country, and the name had no historical precedent or geographical correlation. The man appeared perplexed at the officer's hesitation. He insisted that he'd visited Japan before and that Torrid was a recognized nation with established borders, a functioning government, and embassies in several countries. The passport seemed legitimate. It bore official stamps, signatures, and the usual holographic security details expected in the 1950s. He even carried additional documentation, including a driver's license and personal identification cards, all referencing the same nation. Every detail pointed to a reality that the authorities could not reconcile with their own knowledge. The individual remained calm, polite, and increasingly frustrated as the questioning continued. He explained that his business was urgent and that he needed to attend meetings in the city. Airport staff grew uneasy, unsure how to proceed. While some officers considered the possibility of a forgery, the materials appeared authentic, and the man's knowledge of international travel and procedures was far beyond what would be expected from a casual imposter. His accent, clothing, and mannerisms all suggested a European origin, yet none of the recognized countries aligned with his documents. After hours of deliberation, the authorities decided to detain him in a secure room within the airport while they attempted to verify his story. He had no recollection of ever leaving tour of the world outside what he described. Maps presented to him failed to indicate any trace of his country, leaving him increasingly agitated. He pointed to a location between France and Spain on the map, insisting that this was the homeland he came from. Customs officers examined the surrounding nations, checking historical records, political boundaries, and even obscure maps from libraries. But every attempt to locate Torrid failed. It was as though the country had never existed. During his time in the holding area, the man seemed oddly familiar with the airport's layout, naming nearby streets and landmarks that, to the staff's surprise, corresponded with no known city in Europe. He spoke of the banks, hotels and offices in Torrid, detailing streets and neighborhoods in precise order. Yet again, no evidence supported his claims. Airport employees recalled that he carried a briefcase filled with documents, banknotes and personal effects from Torrid, including what appeared to be legal tender and stamps, all unfamiliar, but seemingly authentic. The authenticity of these items baffled officials as they could not locate the currency or verify its legitimacy. As hours turned into a day, the authorities became increasingly desperate to understand the situation. They attempted to contact other nations to see if anyone recognized Torrid or its official paperwork. No embassy claimed representation, no international body acknowledged the country, and no historical record suggested it had ever existed. The man, meanwhile, grew more anxious, repeatedly stating that he needed to leave and that delaying him could cause problems with his business and governmental affairs. He seemed unaware of the airport's modern procedures and technology, yet perfectly knowledgeable about the bureaucratic processes of his own country. Witnesses later described a strange atmosphere in the room where the man washled. While he waited, he appeared to check his watch frequently, as though tracking time meticulously, and gestured toward walls and exits as if expecting familiar signage to appear. Staff noted that he seemed frustrated by the limitations of the space, unable to understand why the physical world around him no longer matched the one he claimed to inhabit. His temperament, neither aggressive nor hostile, carried a quiet insistence that the world should align with the reality he knew. All versions of the story converge on the same point. The man disappears. Accounts vary, but most agree that within the course of the night, the man vanished from his holding room. Officials claim to have found no signs of escape, no unlocked doors, and no hidden passages that could account for his sudden absence. Some witnesses insisted that when they looked back into the room after stepping away briefly, he was simply gone, leaving behind his briefcase and documents. The airport staff reported a lingering sense of confusion, as if the presence of the man had left a subtle mark on the space itself. In multiple countries over the decades, the tale of the man from Torrid has emerged. Though details shift slightly, the heart of the story never changes. A man arrives at a border carrying papers from a country that doesn't exist and disappears without explanation. Some retellings place him in European airports, others in Asia or the Americas. Yet each account conveys the same impossibility: a traveler arriving from a nation that is simultaneously familiar and unreal. The documents, the mannerisms, and the confidence of the man remain consistent across stories, suggesting either an extraordinary coincidence or something far beyond ordinary experience. The importance of the encounter remains a topic of debate among researchers and enthusiasts. Some suggest he may have come from a parallel dimension or an alternate timeline where Torrid exists in reality, but not in our own historical record. Others theorize a psychological anomaly or an elaborate hoax, though the specificity of details, including stamps, passports, and knowledge of geography, makes outright fabrication difficult to prove. Historical documents, contemporary witness reports, and media articles referencing the event provide tantalizing evidence, yet none offer a clear solution to the mystery. The man from Torrid remains a source of fascination precisely because of the unanswered questions. Unlike ordinary missing person cases or hoaxes, this story implies the possibility of hidden or overlapping realities, a fleeting glimpse of a world that should not exist within our own. For those who study time anomalies, international travel mysteries, or unexplained disappearances, the account challenges assumptions about borders, chronology, and identity. The details endure. The European accent, the passports, the confident insistence on a homeland that cannot be found, and the sudden vanishing that defies ordinary explanation. Even in the present, the case is revisited by historians and enthusiasts who compare travel records, archival evidence, and witness narratives. The story sparks speculation about whether other travelers might have experienced similar anomalies unnoticed, whether airports and borders could serve as junctions between realities, or whether the incident was unique in its precision and strangeness. Whatever the truth, the man from Torrid endures in popular imagination, a reminder that the world may hold layers of reality far beyond our understanding, where the ordinary can intersect with the impossible without warning. The Japanese pilot's vanished hours. Captain Hiroshi Tiada had logged thousands of hours flying commercial aircraft over the Pacific, yet nothing in his career prepared him for the events of June 12, 1987. He was piloting Flight 732, a routine evening route from Tokyo to Osaka, a short trip that should have been uneventful. The weather was clear and air traffic control had confirmed the flight's path, but as the aircraft reached cruising altitude over the Sato Inland Sea, Tiada noticed a brief disruption on the radar. At first, he assumed it was a minor equipment glitch and continued monitoring instruments as usual. Roughly 40 minutes into the flight, communication with air traffic control abruptly ceased. Tiada attempted to reach the nearest tower using standard frequencies, but there was no response. The co-pilot, Kenji Matsuo, repeated the calls, ensuring they followed procedure, yet the radio remained silent. They scanned the skies for other aircraft, checked their instruments, and verified their position. Everything appeared normal in terms of flight performance, altitude, and heading, but the absence of communication was unsettling. The lack of any acknowledgement from ground controls seemed impossible, especially in heavily monitored Japanese airspace. As the minutes stretched into over an hour, Tiada began to sense a strange anomaly. The sun's position seemed slightly off. The shadows cast across the fuselage inconsistent with their calculated time and location. Instruments showed readings that were accurate. Yet, he felt disoriented, as though the plane existed in a layer of time separate from the world below. Despite the unusual sensations, the crew maintained professionalism. Matsuo attempted to navigate visually, keeping landmarks in sight where possible. But over the endless sea there were few reference points. Suddenly a light shimmer appeared on the horizon, reflecting off the water in a way that seemed unnatural. Tiada adjusted the plane slightly to investigate, noticing patterns that resembled coastal cities, yet they did not match any known maps or charts. The shapes were distorted but oddly familiar, as if glimpses of places he had flown near in other contexts, yet modified subtly and dimensional layout. He reported the visual anomaly to Matsuo, and both men noted a quiet unease settling over the cabin. The passengers, unaware of the strange circumstances, read magazines and dozed quietly, leaving the crew to wrestle with the inexplicable sensation surrounding the flight. After several minutes of careful observation, Tiada corrected the aircraft's heading toward what he believed should be Osaka. The strange light faded as they approached familiar airspace, and communications with control resumed abruptly. The radar and radio systems functioned normally, and the air traffic controllers sounded perplexed. "Flight 732, you're right on schedule," the controller said, though Tiada knew it had been over 2 hours since their last verified contact. The discrepancy became immediately apparent. The official records indicated that the flight had taken exactly the normal amount of time, with no interruptions or anomalies. Upon landing at Osaka International, Tiada and Matsuo completed the usual post-flight checks, but a sense of dissonance lingered. Passengers disembarked without incident, unaware of the lost hours. Yet, the flight logs told a story that contradicted the crew's experience. Tiada personally reviewed the instruments and recorded flight data, but all measurements suggested that no unusual event had occurred. The exact period during which they had experienced the blackout was absent from official records, as if the hours had vanished entirely from timekeeping systems. Airline officials initially questioned the crew, concerned about possible negligence or technical errors. Tiada and Matsuo recounted every detail: the radio silence, the disorientation, the strange visual phenomena over the sea. Each description was precise and consistent, yet no corroborating evidence existed. Radar archives from nearby stations showed no deviation from standard flight paths, and satellite tracking indicated a continuous journey that aligned perfectly with the scheduled timeline. The contrast between their first experience and the official data was stark and inexplicable. T struggled in the days that followed, trying to reconcile the bizarre events with what he knew to be real. He revisited every instrument reading, reviewed every communication log, and consulted with aviation experts. Yet, no explanation emerged. Flight 732's journey appeared flawless on paper, yet his memory of the vanished hours remained vivid. The details, slightly altered coastal outlines, strange lighting, and the oppressive silence on radio channels haunted him. Even minor variations, such as the position of the sun or subtle shifts in wind patterns, refused to align with calculations based on recorded time. Fellow pilots shared stories of unusual phenomena over the Pacific, but none matched the precision and duration of Tiada's experience. Some suggested atmospheric anomalies or electronic interference could explain temporary communication blackouts, but the complete erasure of over an hour from flight logs had no precedent. Aviation authorities considered the case but ultimately could not amend the official records. Flight 732 remained a textbook example of a routine journey with no gaps or discrepancies noted for the missing period. Years down the line, the incident remained vivid in Captain Takada's mind, marked as one of the most disquieting moments of his professional life. He noted how a routine flight could intersect with a reality that appeared tangible yet left no trace. The vanished hours of Flight 732 became a private mystery, a personal reminder that time might not always flow uniformly even for highly regulated and monitored processes such as commercial aviation. The discrepancy between perception and recorded reality remained unresolved, offering a glimpse into a phenomenon that could challenge human understanding of time itself. When examining unexplained temporal events, Flight 732 is often brought up by aviation historians and researchers. TIDA's report, combined with meticulous records of instruments, radar tracking, and post-flight logs, forms a rare instance where subjective experience and objective documentation directly conflict. The incident continues to intrigue scientists, pilots, and enthusiasts who study time-related mysteries, highlighting the persistent possibility that periods of existence might slip unnoticed into gaps beyond conventional measurement. For Captain Takada, the flight was more than an isolated oddity. It reinforced the notion that even in highly controlled environments, the boundaries of reality could shift. The vanished hours remained a private enigma experienced fully by those aboard, yet erased from the understanding of the outside world. Flight 732's legacy endures as a haunting reminder of the fragility of temporal perception, a story that suggests the familiar and regulated world of aviation might, under certain circumstances, intersect with the extraordinary and inexplicable. The dinner party that returned a century late. On the outskirts of Bath in the spring of 1793, a modest estate was set to host an exclusive dinner for several members of the local aristocracy. The host, Lord Henry Ashcombe, was known for his refined taste and love of conversation, and he had invited a select group of friends to share an evening of food, music, and discussion. Among the guests were Lady Margaret Waywright, a respected socialite with a keen interest in science, Reverend Jonathan Hale, known for his scholarly pursuits, and Colonel Edward Fairchild, a retired officer with tales of distant campaigns. Everything appeared ordinary as the attendees gathered in the main dining room, which was adorned with oil paintings, polished oak furniture, and flickering candlelight. The dinner began smoothly, with servants moving gracefully between tables, offering dishes of roast game, fresh vegetables, and delicate pastries. Conversation flowed naturally, touching on politics, literature, and recent developments in local agriculture. Yet, as the evening progressed, several guests noticed something unusual. A subtle change in the atmosphere caused a quiet unease, almost imperceptible at first, like the faint hum before a storm. Lady Margaret commented on how the room seemed brighter for a moment, the candles flickering without a draught, and Colonel Fairchild noted a strange hush that settled over the dining room. Around 8, a peculiar event occurred that would puzzle all present for years. Reverend Hale excused himself briefly, intending to retrieve a book from the adjoining library. When he returned, he was astonished to find that 3 of the other guests, Lady Margaret, Colonel Fairchild, and another attendee, Sir Thomas Brumley, had vanished. The table was set exactly as it had been, their chairs empty, and the remnants of their meals untouched. The candles continued to flicker normally, and the servants acted as though nothing were amiss. Despite immediate searching of the house and grounds, no trace of the missing guests could be found. Panic began to rise among those remaining. Lord Ashcombe instructed the servants to check every corner, the cellars, and the surrounding gardens. Yet no one had seen the missing individuals depart. Windows and doors were secured, and the heavy drapes covering the room remained drawn, eliminating the possibility of escape. Reverend Hale insisted that he had not heard footsteps or voices beyond the initial departure, and the other witnesses agreed that there had been no warning of the disappearance. It was as though the guests had simply been removed from the flow of time itself. After what felt like hours to those searching, the missing attendees returned as suddenly as they had vanished. Lady Margaret and Colonel Fairchild reappeared in their seats at the table, perfectly dressed and seemingly unharmed. Sir Thomas adjusted his chair and looked around, bewildered but calm. None of them could explain what had happened, insisting that they had not left the room or interacted with anyone during the time they were gone. Their watches and pocket sundials, however, had stopped working and showed no movement during the interval, reinforcing the sense that time had been suspended or altered. Questions arose immediately. Lord Ashcombe and his guests debated the possible causes, considering everything from trickery to illness, but no natural explanation sufficed. Lady Margaret described a sensation of floating as if moving through a corridor of light, though she could recall no concrete events. Colonel Fairchild claimed to have seen landscapes and structures unfamiliar to the estate, though the memories were fleeting and difficult to articulate. Sir Thomas recalled a faint sound of music, but not the instruments of the present. It was as though he'd been listening to an echo from another era. The incident quickly became the subject of local gossip, and neighbors visited the estate to hear the story firsthand. Many were skeptical, assuming the guests had played a prank or suffered a shared hallucination. Yet the consistency of each person's account made the explanation of deceit improbable. Over the following weeks, Lord Ashcombe recorded detailed statements from each participant, noting the peculiar alignment of clocks, the undisturbed setting of the dining room, and the vivid yet intangible experiences described by the guests. These records survived in family archives and were later cited by historians studying early accounts of temporal anomalies. Scholars analyzing the case in the 19th and 20th centuries noted several striking features. First, the disappearance and reappearance were sudden without transitional warning, suggesting a form of temporal displacement rather than physical abduction. Second, the witnesses reported an altered perception of time and space, describing sights and sensations inconsistent with the physical environment of the 1790s. Third, the anomaly affected multiple individuals simultaneously, indicating a shared experience of the phenomenon rather than isolated hallucinations. These elements made the dinner party a rare and compelling example of what some researchers would later term a time slip. Through centuries of storytelling, the account of the disappearing dinner guests has continued to captivate local tradition. Descendants of the Ashcombe family retell the event as an extraordinary episode in the estate's history, emphasizing the calm and composed demeanor of those who vanished and returned. Visitors to the old dining room, now preserved as part of a historical museum, report an uncanny feeling, a sense that time itself is fragile in that space. Historians have debated whether the incident reflects early accounts of a temporal anomaly, psychological phenomena, or a combination of both, but the mystery remains unresolved. It sparked wider curiosity and debate across scholarly and paranormal communities. Some theorists suggest that rare configurations of electromagnetic fields combined with atmospheric conditions might temporarily distort the perception of time and space, allowing individuals to experience a brief displacement. Others propose that consciousness itself may occasionally slip into alternate timelines, producing vivid experiences that align with parallel realities. While these ideas remain controversial, the dinner party offers a concrete narrative in which multiple eyewitnesses reported the same inexplicable event under controlled circumstances. Uncertainty about what had caused it did little to lessen the lasting effect the incident had on those involved. Lady Margaret wrote in her diary that she could still recall the faint glow and unusual sounds, sensations that seemed to linger even after normally returned. Colonel Fairchild maintained a meticulous record of what he saw, mapping unfamiliar streets and structures in sketchbooks that survived long after his death. Sir Thomas, in letters to family members, described a sense of timelessness that haunted him for the rest of his life, a reminder that ordinary routines might occasionally intersect with forces beyond understanding. As one of the earliest accounts suggesting a potential time slip, the story of the disappearing dinner party continues to captivate. It illustrates how ordinary events, an evening meal, friendly conversation, and simple hospitality can become extraordinary when the boundaries of time appear to bend. The guest, calm return, their unaged appearance, and the consistency of their testimony create a puzzle that has fascinated historians, researchers, and enthusiasts for over 2 centuries. Even today, the tale continues to capture imaginations. A lingering question about what might happen when the present moment is temporarily suspended and time itself behaves in ways beyond human comprehension. The mystery of Olaf Jansson's farmhouse. Olaf Jansson was a lifelong farmer living on a small property near Västerås, Sweden, surrounded by dense forests and open fields. In late October of 1979, he rose early to tend to his animals, as he did every day. The morning mist hung low over the fields, giving the landscape an ethereal glow, and the chill of autumn pressed against his coat. That day, Olaf noticed a faint, unusual light emanating from the far corner of his property near the edge of the forest. At first, he assumed it was the sun catching a break in the clouds, but the glow was too steady, too vibrant to be natural. Curiosity drew him closer. As he walked across the dewy grass, the light grew stronger, warm, and almost magnetic, inviting him forward. When he reached the source, Olaf found himself at the doorway of a small, weathered farmhouse he had passed countless times, but never entered. The glow seemed to pour from the windows and the cracks around the doorframe. Without hesitation, he stepped inside, expecting to find the familiar interior of an abandoned structure. Yet, the space was transformed. The farmhouse had been bathed in soft, shimmering light that seemed to come from no visible source. The walls, previously worn and faded, appeared pristine, and the wooden floor glimmered faintly as if polished by some invisible hand. Olaf blinked in disbelief, his eyes adjusting to a brightness that felt both natural and otherworldly. In the center of the main room stood a group of people, unfamiliar in appearance, yet immediately welcoming. The clothing was unlike anything Olaf had seen, sleek and minimal, with muted colors that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Olaf's initial surprise quickly gave way to cautious curiosity. The people spoke softly in a language he did not understand at first. Their speech had rhythm and cadence that felt strangely familiar, and gradually he began to reconsistenize words, though only fragmentarily. They gestured toward the walls and objects within the room, demonstrating tools and devices that seemed to operate silently, powered by unseen energy. A small glowing console emitted soft pulses, responding to the touch of one of the visitors without any visible buttons or switches. Olaf felt an odd mixture of fear and wonder, realizing that he had entered a space far beyond his own time. One of the figures approached him, speaking in a tone that combined calm authority with reassurance. Olaf understood that they were observing him as much as he was observing them. They indicated the passage of time using symbols he did not recognize, but their gestures suggested a timeline that extended far beyond anything he could imagine. He was being shown glimpses of a future, moments in which technology and society had evolved in ways he could scarcely comprehend. Holographic images projected from small handheld devices displaying landscapes, cities, and transportation systems that defied current engineering. The visitors moved with a quiet grace, interacting with instruments and displays with an ease that suggested deep familiarity. Olaf noticed subtle details in their appearance. Thin wrist devices that monitored vital signs, small luminescent symbols on their sleeves that changed color, and footwear that seemed to hover slightly above the ground. They spoke to each other in short phrases, often glancing at him as if acknowledging his presence without fully including him in their work. Despite the strangeness, there was no hostility. They exuded a sense of purpose, as if this encounter had been anticipated, planned, and yet necessary for him to witness. Olaf spent what felt like hours in the farmhouse, walking among the visitors, observing their interactions and attempting to understand the displays. They gestured toward the outside, and he peered through the windows, expecting to see the Swedish fields as usual. Instead, the view was transformed. Cities with buildings taller than any he'd ever seen stretched into the horizon, their surfaces gleaming under unfamiliar skies. Transportation moved silently along intricate networks, and the light above seemed diffused in a manner that suggested a different atmosphere entirely. He realized that this was not simply a glimpse of a distant place, but a vision of a distant time. Eventually, one of the visitors approached Olaf with a gesture that he interpreted as an invitation to leave. The light at the doorway had grown brighter, and he stepped forward cautiously, feeling a pull from the outside world. When he crossed the threshold, the farmhouse returned to its familiar, dilapidated state. The glow had vanished, leaving only the autumn mist and the quiet of the Swedish countryside. The animals in the yard stirred as if sensing his return, and Olaf felt disoriented by the sudden shift back to normality. What had happened to Olaf was shared repeatedly over the following days, reaching friends and neighbors alike. Some dismissed it as a dream or the result of autumn fatigue, but his account was detailed and consistent, including descriptions of the visitors' clothing, their tools, and the futuristic city glimpsed through the windows. He sketched the objects and symbols he had seen, though none resembled contemporary technology. The farmhouse itself remained ordinary, yet he could not forget the light, the people, or the profound sense of time stretching beyond his comprehension. In later interviews, Olaf reflected on the encounter as one of the most extraordinary experiences of his life. He never encountered the visitors again, but the memory persisted vividly. He described the farmhouse as a temporary junction between his world and a future reality, a fleeting bridge in which time and space had momentarily overlapped. The glow, the machines, and the visitors' movements remained imprinted on his mind, a constant reminder that reality could hold layers beyond ordinary perception. Time-related encounters like Olaf's were catalogued by investigators and enthusiasts eager to explore the unexplained. The precision of his descriptions, including dates, locations, and objects, made the story compelling. Unlike dream reports or hallucinations, Olaf provided sketches, measurements, and first-hand recollections that suggested he had truly witnessed something extraordinary. The mystery of the farmhouse continues to intrigue those who study the possibility of temporal anomalies, offering a rare glimpse into an experience where the past, present, and future intersect within a single glowing room. For Olaf Jansson, the encounter changed his perception of the world. He became attuned to the subtleties of light, sound, and movement around his property, noticing shifts that others might overlook. The farmhouse, ordinary to all who passed by, became a symbol of a boundary between known and unknown, a place where the ordinary rules of time could be suspended. The story endures as one of the most remarkable accounts of brief contact with the future, a testament to the possibility that ordinary landscapes may conceal extraordinary events for those who are present at the right moment.